Vishnabel Lori Kisamalos introduces herself as the only imperial princess of the nation. She recalls her horrific past, a punishment where her limbs were torn apart. Back in the present, she finds herself in a death row chamber, confused to be there again. She realizes she's returned to the moment before her execution and predicts what the executioner will say. As a guard grabs her, she throws a tantrum on the floor, screaming that she doesn't want to go. Panicked, she questions why she returned to the past right before her execution, as guards surround her. While being carried away, she complains that regressions should provide at least a week's time, not mere moments. Facing the prospect of dismemberment again, she desperately prays to the ancestor god of Kisomalos. A rope tightens around her wrist as she notes the god hasn't participated in ancestral rites lately. Bound tightly by ropes, she begs for the god to appear and save her. A golden-haired deity, god Kisamalos, appears before her, asking if she was looking for him. Wham! Enraged, she lands a princess uppercut on his jaw, screaming that he's finally arrived. She continues to pummel the surprised god. Kisamalos surrenders, shakily pleading for her to just listen to what he has to say. Now seated at a table, the princess reluctantly agrees to give the deity a chance to explain. God Kisamalos looks shocked and bewildered by her violent reaction. Pow! She punches him again as he protests that his divine power has weakened. She furiously demands to know what he means by his power being weakened. The nervous deity places a hand over his heart, trying to compose himself. She vehemently rejects his excuse, calling his logic trash. The god desperately tries to explain that to increase the family's divine power, descendants must live recklessly, like he once did. He continues, stating that failing to live recklessly causes the family to fall to ruin. Kisamalos frantically gestures, trying to make his point, while the princess sits in stunned disbelief. She has a terrible realization. Living like trash strengthens the family, meaning she's lived her life completely wrong. She bemoans her diligent life, recalling how she studied and worked tirelessly. She reveals the reason for her hard work was her biological father, the emperor. Portraits identify her parents, labeling her father as the worst emperor in the dynasty's 500-year history. Her father, a puppet emperor, is shown selling government positions to the highest bidder. He was notoriously corrupt, with 28 official mistresses and countless illegitimate children. His greatest flaw was his utter incompetence, shown as he stares blankly at an important statistics report. He dismissively throws the boring documents at an aide, having failed to form any useful connections. His lack of leadership allowed corrupt officials to celebrate, freely evading taxes and raising them for personal gain. Eventually, her father was executed by guillotine, a fate she felt he deserved. However, a mysterious Grand Duke then appeared and unexpectedly sentenced her to death by dismemberment. She laments her fate, wishing she could have had a quicker death by poison or guillotine. She was condemned for doing nothing while the nation collapsed, despite her desperate efforts to save it. The Grand Duke's reason for her sentence was her perceived failure as the rightful heir. He declared her punishment would be dismemberment for her insolence, sealing her fate. Recalling the accusation, she screams back in defiance, denying she did nothing. She cries out in anguish, yelling that the imperial finances would have collapsed without her. While other children played, she recalls being shut away, forced to study imperial governance. She remembers training tirelessly, mastering self-defense through grueling practice. She even worked in her father's stead while on an IV, only to be dragged away by the Grand Duke and torn apart for not living recklessly. Slumping in defeat, she tells God Kisamalos that she has lived her entire life in vain. She angrily rejects his attempt to console her, shouting that she's already dead. The god panics, exclaiming that something grave has happened. Enraged, she grabs him by the throat, screaming that nothing is graver than the death of the last heir. As she chokes him, she hears a ticking sound and asks what he's talking about. He confirms it's a clock. He collapses into her arms as she questions him about borrowed divine power. He confesses that while turning back time, he ran low on power and had to borrow some from a mysterious clock-headed being. Furious, she lands a flying kick on the kneeling god. God Kisamalos declares she must repay the borrowed divine power after regressing. She angrily retorts that if the heir is a fool, it's because the house deity is one. He laughs dismissively, finding her logic absurd. Still floating in a divine space, she demands to know why he sent her back exactly 16 years. He sings that youth blooms at 18, prompting her to think he's utterly disgraceful. He apologizes, explaining she has to die once more before regressing. She panics, fearing another dismemberment and wondering if it's a buy one get one free deal. Back on the execution platform, bound by ropes, she hears narration mocking the god's incompetence for letting his descendant die twice. The god winks and flashes a peace sign as she screams in pure terror. She accepts her fate, admitting she has lived her life in vain until now. She is reintroduced as Vishnubel Loro Kisamalos, now 5 years old. As the empire's sole princess, the young Vishnubel looks downcast. She processes her new reality. Dismembered twice, now regressed to the age of 5. Narration explains that in her world, divine power and status are everything, determining a family's prosperity for generations. She throws a tantrum, screaming that it's ridiculous for the emperor to have ruined everything in a single generation. Realizing her words are slurred, she's interrupted by 3 maids who rush in to greet her. A red-haired maid offers her a bowl, which Visha thinks is cold water, perfect for when she's feeling down. She holds the bowl, preparing to drink. Quack! She spits the contents directly into the shocked red-haired maid's face. Visha screams hysterically, accusing them of trying to poison her. A maid's hands clench into fists out of sight. The maids rush toward her, pleading for Her Highness to drink the antidote to cure the paralysis in her tongue. A black-haired maid furiously insists she take her medicine, blaming a venomous woman for her state. Another maid offers her favorite strawberry candies to help cleanse her palate. With a jolt of realization, Visha remembers this moment of paralysis. A flashback reveals one of her father's lovers fed her a paralysis potion, for which the woman was later beheaded. The paralysis lasted for 2 years, forcing her to speak with a lisp through all her lessons. With a weary sigh, she agrees to take the medicine. The maids smile, revealing they wisely prepared an extra dose in advance. The red-haired maid praises her as a great ruler, and Visha internally agrees that she is indeed wise. After taking the medicine, a maid rewards her with a pink, gem-like strawberry candy. The red-haired maid, moved, kneels, and declares that from this day forward, her name is Emily. Visha asks for the date, and Emily confirms it is the 3rd day of the 11th month in the year 8173. Back in the divine space, she realizes the date is exactly 16 years before her dismemberment, just as Lord Kisamalo said. The young Visha sits on her bed, deep in thought. She dreads the consequences of not repaying the divine debt, fearing she'll be dismembered for every bit she owes. She resolves to figure out how to raise his divine status. A vision of God Kisomalos explains that he had to live recklessly, like a piece of trash. Visha concludes she can't just be a simple moron. There must be a hidden method to raising divine status. She deduces that Lord Kisomalos grew his power by gathering talented people to his side. Having figured it out, she flops onto her floral bedspread. Lying on her back, she smiles with newfound determination, a single red nail polished. Now in a fancy blue dress, she marches down the hall with her maids, heading to the royal regent to fire all her tutors. With a determined glint in her eyes, she announces her plan to live recklessly. She smugly decides that from now on, she'll just throw on random clothes and wander around like a delinquent. Her thoughts are cut short as she gasps in pure shock and delight. Ta-da! Before her stands a giant blue elephant slide she used to dream about. Casting dignity aside, she sprints toward the slide as Emily chases after her, shouting that it's dangerous. She zooms down the slide with a joyful scream, reassuring her maid she's fine, while Emily panics at the incredible speed. With a whoosh, she flies off the end of the star-covered blue slide. Thwack! She lands in a heap on the grass below. Beaming with pure delight, she declares that this is so much fun. She eagerly scrambles back up the ladder, amazed she's lived so long without this joy. Vowing to make up for lost fun, she decides to ride the slide every single day. A voice from below interrupts her, angrily shouting for her to get down. A small blonde-haired boy points at the slide, declaring his daddy bought it for him, much to Visha's confusion. The boy, identified as the Emperor's illegitimate child, Trinity, threatens her, boasting that his dad is the Emperor. Still paralyzed, Visha slurs a defiant question, asking who he thinks she is. Frustrated, she internally curses the lingering paralysis after biting her tongue. The furious boy begins shaking the slide's ladder, screaming for her to get down. As the slide shakes violently, Visha yells at the crazy brat to stop and wait. Losing her grip, she's sent hurtling down the slide with a terrified expression. Screaming, "Big thing!" she launches off the slide again, flying directly toward the boy. Bam! She crashes headfirst into him, furiously yelling that the slide is hers. The maids arrive to find Visha relentlessly pummeling the crying boy, screaming for the insolent brat to die. Now stewing on a couch, Visha fumes that she'll never forgive that moron for landing her in a political prison camp. She lets out a furious scream that cracks the stone walls around her. In another cell, a dark-haired man reading a book looks up, wondering what that sound was. The imposing man is puzzled, questioning why a child's voice is coming from inside the prison. A guard carries the thrashing princess into a cell as she complains about being locked up by that blockhead. In a flashback, a triumphant Visha declares victory over the crying boy, telling her maids he cried first. She resents that the so-called legitimate heir gets all the imperial playground rides when she just wanted to play. She screams that it's unfair, yelling that she hates prison. A guard warns her that her disturbance will enrage the emperor, but she internally dismisses him as a blockhead. Grabbing a microphone, she begins a dramatic one-girl protest, repeatedly screaming for them to let her out. Boom! A powerful flash of energy explodes from her as she screams. Staring at the new hole in the wall, she wonders in shock if her voice was really that loud. The man in the adjoining cell tells her this is no place for a child and asks why she was imprisoned. Visha peeks through the hole and proudly announces that she hit someone. The man asks who. The man smirks, realizing with amusement that the child is Her Highness, the princess. Visha chastises the man for his impudence, calling him an insolent wretch before performing a quick mic test. The man calmly apologizes for his rudeness, and she magnanimously agrees to let it go. Turning his head, the man asks her why she hit the prince. Visha explains her side of the story, recalling how the 4-star brat tried to claim her elephant slide. She crosses her arms defiantly, declaring that as the rightful heir, everything in the imperial family belongs to her. The man laments the future of a spoiled brat becoming emperor, earning a furious "How dare you" from Visha. She stomps her foot in indignation. Stroking his beard, the man changes his tune, deciding that as long as she won, that's all that matters. He muses that this political prison is reserved for powerful families who openly oppose the emperor. Looking through the hole, he reasons that for the princess to be locked up, the common-born boy must have powerful, mid-tier divine backing. The princess beams with delight, feeling that this development is good timing to relieve her stress. She dramatically flops over, questioning her father's sanity, while the man dryly suggests he has a brain, presumably. Startled, she sits up as the man addresses her as Your Highness, the princess. The guard appears at the cell door to summon her, and she realizes the blockhead emperor is finally making his move. With a determined look, she gets up and agrees to go. The man asks if she's leaving already, and she haughtily replies that the imperial heir can't remain in prison for long. She pauses for a moment, hesitating before she leaves. The man calls for her to wait and to bring someone named Himang with her. Striking a cute pose, she promises to try and get him released, declaring it's her duty as a splendid princess. The little blonde girl angrily questions being summoned to an empty palace. Before ornate doors, it's confirmed the empire has no empress. She recalls her mother, the last empress, who died attempting immolation. But tragically, her mother was the only one who perished in the fire. The man she calls Blockhead survived with severe burns and trauma. Haunted by the incident, he never appointed a new empress. Instead, the emperor simply gave the palace to his pink-haired mistress. Disgusted by the disrespect to her lineage, the girl reluctantly enters. She finds the shirtless emperor, who calls her Bisha, and scorns his shamelessness. He demands a greeting. She offers a curt hello. Two maids forcefully hold the defiant girl's face still. The emperor sternly asks Bisha if she struck someone named Trimurti. She looks up innocently, asking if her mother burned to death. A tense silence follows her sharp question. She continues, mockingly asking if her mother has returned from the dead. Enraged, her father grabs her, asking if she's trying to anger him. He demands she apologize to his mistress, but she silently refuses. Crash, Bisha screams. She'd rather be quartered, smashing a nearby vase. Clang! She snatches a candlestick from the table. Brandishing the candle, she declares herself his mother now, threatening him with fire. You've gone mad, he roars, ordering the guards to lock her away in a cell. Back in a familiar cell, she's greeted by a voice from a crack in the wall. Holding her bruised cheek, she asks her fellow prisoner to patch her up. A large bearded man with black hair asks with concern if she is hurt. She throws a tantrum, furious that her father slapped her before she could fight back. Hearing this, the bearded man's expression turns dangerously grim. The girl grabs a microphone out of thin air and wails for a doctor. Smash. The bearded man's fist shatters the wall in a violent rage. Bisha stares at the destruction, utterly dumbfounded. Amidst the rubble, the man calmly asks if she's all right. She stammers, intimidated by the towering man before her. He suddenly compares her to a fish-shaped pastry, leaving her utterly confused. Kwang! With a single kick, he demolishes the cell door. He instructs a guard to protect the princess, then departs. Bisha watches him leave, completely bewildered by the turn of events. She yells after him, complaining he broke her door and she'll catch a cold. A green-haired doctor arrives, looking worriedly at the scene. Do my eyes look fine to you? She screams at the terrified doctor. The doctor gently dabs a cotton swab on her injured cheek. Now bandaged, Bisha decides to read one of the books left in the cell. She finds a banned book on republicanism, realizing why the man was imprisoned. The bearded man suddenly reappears, startling her. He smirks, proudly announcing that he just beat up the emperor for her. Bisha is shocked he's still alive, thinking he must have powerful connections. She thinks his voice is deep and growly, like a grizzly bear. Bumgora. Bumgora, the bearded man, confirms his identity with a simple, yeah. Bisha bluntly tells the bear-like man that he needs to shave. He asks for praise for his actions, but she coolly asks if she ever requested it. Exasperated, Bumgora covers his face as she lectures him on self-satisfaction. Bisha passionately lectures on the dangers of craving recognition. Continuing her lecture, she tells the exasperated Bumgora to handle himself properly. Bumgora warns her to be more careful about reading banned books and overthrowing emperors. He gently tucks the sleeping Bisha into bed, wishing her well. Bumgora quietly watches over her as she sleeps. The next day, Bisha furiously flips a food tray, screaming about the terrible meal. Two panicked servants explain that prison food is always bland. Having made her point, she stands triumphantly amidst a floral background. The servants kneel, praising her generosity and vowing to obey her command. Now smug, Bisha calls out Bumgora's name with a wink. He turns to her, questioning her about self-satisfaction. Calling her an ungrateful brat, Bumgora sits down as she peeks over a partition. A guard brings Bumgora a meal as a bundled-up Bisha watches. She reaches over and plucks a large strawberry from his salad. Offering him the strawberry, she quietly thanks him for something Emery brought. She cheekily throws his words back at him, claiming it's for her own self-satisfaction. Bisha recalls her Aunt Lorowe's lesson on pride as Bumgora recognizes the name. Surprised, she asks him How he knows her aunt. His expression darkens as he reveals their family conspired to murder his parents. As Bisha apologizes, he coldly states his parents were weak and at fault anyway, leaving her utterly confused. He recalls how his uncle sent him to die, but he survived and wiped out his uncle's entire family to claim his inheritance. He finishes his story, explaining his imprisonment is a form of atonement. Bisha thoughtfully concludes he has a conscience, and his beard proves his commitment. She advises a guard to enjoy life, a message clearly meant for Bamgora. Getting his attention again, she prepares to make a declaration. The little girl nervously asks for his hand. She reaches up and gently takes his hand in hers. Stumbling over her words, she begins a formal proclamation. Bamgora's solemn voice recites the official words of the true bloodline. As she holds his hand and smiles brightly, she formally pardons his sins. Looking down at her, he grants her freedom in return. She declares his atonement over, and then bluntly orders him to shave. After she calls him a grizzly bear, he looks shocked but agrees. Giving his hand a little shake, she asks him to show some manners next time. He accepts her proposal with a fierce grin, leaving her confused. Clang! He suddenly smashes through the prison wall with a powerful kick. He lands gracefully amidst the rubble of his escape. The prison guards salute as he sprints away, wishing him safe travels. Bisha stares after him in shock, yelling about his sudden departure. The narration confirms Bamgora has officially broken out of prison. Soon after, Bisha is ordered back to her room, leaving the prison with a cool wave. She realizes an aide rushed an imperial decree to release her amid public pressure. Now free, she renews her vow to dethrone the emperor. Later, while relaxing and eating snacks, she lazily flips through a book. Suddenly, an item in the book catches her eye, and she gasps in excitement. It's an advertisement for the season's hottest item, squeaky duck shoes. Remembering her childhood jealousy of another girl's pair, she decides she must have them. In a frenzy, she grabs a broom and frantically calls for her attendant, Emily. A dark-haired maid appears, formally introducing herself as that day's Emily. Bisha excitedly demands Emily buy her the squeaky duck shoes. Emily dashes off with incredible speed, vowing to retrieve the item immediately. Bisha blushes with anticipation, eager to try on her new shoes. Her happy thoughts are interrupted by the sudden appearance of a red-haired woman. The woman looks down with an expression of stern disapproval. She furiously screams Bisha's name. Bisha recognizes the woman, muttering the name Aunt Kizelnu. The woman is formally introduced as Kizelnu Leroy, the late empress's sister. Bisha recalls her aunt constantly screeching at her about dignity. She also remembers her aunt furiously tearing up all her incoming love letters. Her aunt would also force her into her mother's hobbies, comparing her unfavorably. Despite promising to help, her aunt only undermined her position in the palace. Bisha glares, wondering why her aunt is here, and not at the battlefield. She seethes with anger, realizing her aunt wasn't there to save her from being imprisoned. Kizelnu approaches, sternly asking what Bisha did to get locked up in prison. Grab. Her aunt suddenly pinches her cheeks, demanding to know what happened to her face. Kizelnu lists Bisha's beautiful features, complaining only that her eyes resemble her father's. Bisha is flustered by the unnecessarily detailed compliments. Kizelnu furiously berates a maid for not bringing a healing divine crystal for Bisha's measly scratch. An explanation reveals a divine crystal is an object of crystallized divine power. A healing crystal is so powerful it can miraculously reattach a severed arm. A high god's crystal is shown to be worth more than the entire princess's palace. Kizelnu proudly declares she will pay for the crystal herself. Bisha bluntly calls her aunt a beggar who spent all her money on the war. She calls her tacky and tells her to get married, making her aunt tremble with rage. As punishment, Kizelnu attacks Bisha with tickles, sending the girl into a panic. Bisha yelps, overwhelmed by her aunt's surprisingly fast tickle attack. Just then, Emily returns, presenting an item to Her Highness. She proudly presents the squeaky duck shoes, which she intercepted from Trinity. Bisha praises Emily's work, leaving a stunned Kizelnu to watch. Bisha eagerly tells Emily to put the shoes on her right away. Squeak! The new duck shoe is on her foot. She gasps in delight, realizing the shoes really do squeak. Bisha hops around the room joyfully in her new squeaky shoes. She suddenly stops, composing herself with a cough. Bisha knows her aunt finds her adorable, despite Kazelnu trying to hide her smile. She strikes a proud pose, confidently asking if she's cute. PF'd, Emily can't help but let out a burst of laughter. Bisha sternly questions Emily, who immediately drops to her knees, begging for her life. As the others watch in shock, Bisha announces she will personally administer the punishment. She declares that as penance, Emily will attend her during her bath. Emily prostrates herself on the floor, weeping with eternal gratitude. Kazelnu offers to join, but Bisha flatly bans her aunt from the bathroom. As Kazelnu screams in protest, two maids struggle to hold her back. Bisha watches the chaos with a completely deadpan expression. Later, Bisha is peacefully sipping a drink from a bunny-themed cup. She smiles contentedly, basking in a moment of happiness. She thinks about her victories, getting rid of her aunt and acquiring new shoes. She declares her life is paradise as a maid serves her a drink. Bisha furiously asks Emily if she's looking for a severe punishment as the maids cower. Emily, nursing a bandaged cheek, explained she was teaching a lesson to riffraff from the Empress's palace. Bisha realizes a mere concubine's handmaiden would only dare pick a fight if her mistress was acting like the true empress. Deep in thought, she understands that if this continues, her own position will be threatened. She decides she needs to find someone to fight the concubine on her behalf. With a brilliant flash of inspiration, she hatches a plan. Standing tall, she orders Emily to prepare what she needs at once. A man in a sharp black shoe takes a confident step forward. A black-haired man in a magnificent cape looks down from a balcony, spotting Bisha from afar. With a determined gaze, he declares he's on his way to see the kid. As the sun sets over a grand palace, a new plan begins to unfold. Bisha sits at a table with her maids, vowing to wait in front of the emperor's palace until he wakes up. Two elegantly dressed ladies arrive, asking if Her Highness summoned them. A flashback reveals the emperor taking a new mistress, which diminished the standing of a scorned, purple-haired woman. Bisha plans to attach Count Brigitte's daughter, the new mistress, to the blockhead emperor. Surprised to see the count's daughter has a sister, she figures one of them will surely be to the emperor's taste. She smiles, planning to time the introduction for the moment the blockhead wakes up. Her confidence wavers as she panics, realizing she has no idea what to talk about at a tea party. A memory of her studious past confirms she knows nothing of trends or gossip, only work and studying. Seeing her reflection in her teacup, she suddenly gets a brilliant idea for a topic. Bisha boldly asks her guests what the most crucial factor is for attacking the Loraruz fortress. The women are shocked as she confirms she means the Medea Kingdom's military fortress. Now in military uniforms, the women debate tactics over a map, one suggesting poisoning the food. Bisha, sporting sunglasses, confidently counters that contaminating the water supply would be much easier. Her guests get swept up in the wargaming, passionately debating the next steps. Pointing with authority, Bisha brings their chaotic debate to a halt. She declares that the most important consideration is timing. Bisha explains they must discuss the conditions for the assault, noting international law forbids surprise attacks. The two sisters, completely exhausted, beg to stop the discussion, with one blindly agreeing with everything Bisha says. Bisha finds them pathetic, but resolves to continue until the emperor appears, though she'd rather play house. An angry voice interrupts, demanding to know who is causing a ruckus outside the palace. The blonde-haired emperor appears, and Bisha mentally urges him to take his new mistress away. The two women bow and apologize, begging His Majesty to quell his anger. The emperor turns his back, complaining about the noise and threatening to make Bisha pay. The two women nervously agree to obey whatever command he gives. Changing his tune, the emperor pulls both surprised women into his arms to hear their excuses. Bisha watches with disdain, realizing with delight that he's taking both of them as his mistresses. Looking up at the sky, she concludes that her father is worse than a dog. Time passes to a Christmas celebration, where Visha notes the wretched woman's arrogance has subsided thanks to the new mistresses. Visha is pleased to see the Brigitte sisters are keeping the emperor in check better than she expected. As Christmas approaches, she thinks about how much she hates the holiday. An explanation reveals that Christmas is when household gods bless their chosen successor, depending on the god's values. As the sole heir, Visha is the designated successor, as divine power is passed down to the eldest. She laments that with her god's power gone, she'll be paying off debts on her birthday instead of receiving gifts. A red-haired woman screams and runs toward her, shouting that it's an emergency. The woman snatches Visha up, who protests being lifted so suddenly. Her aunt wraps her in a blanket, telling her to be quiet as Visha asks what's happening. The aunt panics, realizing it's someone named Kiran, a name Visha finds vaguely familiar. Visha's eyes widen with curiosity as she peeks out from her warm blanket cocoon. Remembering a past Christmas surprise with her aunt, she wonders if this is another one of her extravagant events. As her aunt runs, she realizes the imperial palace has been infiltrated by a small, elite force. Visha gives a thumbs up, hoping the intruders assassinate the emperor for Christmas. Peeking from her blanket, she scoffs that the intruders don't stand a chance with so few troops. A narration identifies the red-haired woman as Aunt Kazelnu, commander of the Imperial Guard. A boot steps forward as a voice calls out for Lady Kazelnu Lorowi. A brown-haired man in uniform pleads for them to stop. Aunt Kazelnu smirks, questioning the man's nerve for blocking her path. The man desperately warns Lady Kazelnu that she will die if she leaves. He tearfully clarifies with a grin that he will be the one to die. While her aunt stands confused, the man explains Duke Kiran means no harm and begs her to come quietly. He clutches his uniform, repeating his plea for her to come with them. He dramatically reveals a vest of dynamite, introducing himself as the insane explosion divine general. Visha and her aunt scream in terror as Kazelnu yells that the crazy bastard will blow up the palace. The man sniffles, insisting it isn't a threat, and swearing on his life that his master means it. He wails that after years, his master suddenly demands troops and power, a request that will get him killed. Visha calmly tells her aunt to go with them and asks to be put down. As she's set down, the man asks if he killed all of his family. The aunt and Visha stare in shock as Kazelnu wonders if she should offer condolences. He cheerfully replies that his family deserved it, giving Visha a strange sense of déjà vu. Visha takes the man's hand, telling him to lead the way. Determined, she thinks she needs to see the face of the bastard named Ende. A dark-haired man named Ende sits on the throne, his foot on Visha's cowering father. The guard announces their arrival as Visha and her aunt enter the throne room. Visha furiously points, screaming at the cursed fools for daring to sit on the throne. Ende mockingly comments on her weight, and Visha furiously retorts that she's a normal weight. Stomping her feet, she demands to know what he knows about her. Her aunt explodes with rage, threatening to kill them all, as Ende coolly identifies her as the problem. Ende declares he will follow Visha's choice, while her father desperately begs her to choose him. Visha demands a proper explanation, stating she acted freely because they never intervened. Ende vows to protect Visha if chosen, but offers to commit suicide if she doesn't pick him. Finding the explanation lacking, the brown-haired man offers to clarify Ende's unusual nature. He explains at a chalkboard that his superior, Ende Kiran, just got out of prison and suddenly declared himself Visha's father. He continues, explaining the operation's high stakes. Visha's choice will decide her father. He panics, realizing if neither is chosen, he'll have to self-destruct along with the emperor. The aunt dismisses the idea as impossible, and Visha agrees, stating her aunt can't handle politics. Visha eyes Ende suspiciously, asking if he's the culprit she's been looking for. Confused, Ende asks what she could have possibly thought until now. Flustered, Visha insists first impressions matter, and she couldn't recognize his audacious face. Ende kicks her father again, reminding them his cousin still possesses explosive divine authority. Visha sighs in exasperation, calling the culprit a crazy one. Ende admits he hears that often, but Visha retorts that it's not a compliment. Visha tells Ende to follow her to talk things out, and he agrees. Her father pleads for her not to worry, but she dismisses him as all bark and no bite. Visha and Ende walk off together, leaving her father behind. Climbing onto a tiny throne, Visha orders Ende to kneel before her, and he complies. She sits on her throne, looking down at the kneeling man. Ende asks why he's kneeling, and Visha simply tells him to think about it. Visha throws a fit, screaming at the culprit for saying he'll die if she gets involved. He calmly reveals that he has returned, having gone back 16 years in time, shocking Visha. Kneeling, Ende cynically asks if she really thinks the princess would believe such a story. The small blonde girl on the throne suspiciously asks the black-haired man if he also time-traveled. The black-haired man smirks confidently, replying that he knew things would be like this. She quickly dismisses her own words as a slip of the tongue, explaining that her family's deity Chiron appeared in her dream. The man contemplates how the god Chiron fell to a lower level after helping Kisomalos turn back time, concluding that Kisomalos must be suffering. Her eyes widen in a sudden flash of insight, realizing the truth of the situation. She explains Chiron's warning that if he isn't restored in 16 years, someone else must bear his karma, prompting the man to ask about the princess. The man grimaces, remembering his fate is to repeat that day's torture for eternity. The girl turns to face him, looking determined as she addresses the culprit. With a cute expression, she asks if they might have met somewhere other than their prison. He thinks she's as perceptive as a ghost, despite acting like a bear cub, and she immediately retorts that the line is hers. He looks pained, admitting that while he doesn't have memories of time traveling, Chiron insists he has. Oh ho ho. She laughs triumphantly, realizing his wrong judgment caused the execution of Kisomalos' legitimate heir. She leaps onto him, furiously shaking him and asking if he knows how much pain he caused, to which he calmly apologizes. Now perched on his shoulders, she offers to raise him properly if he bets his life on her, while he vows to support her in recovering her divine power. She tugs at his hair, demanding to know why he's helping her, and telling him to hurry up and tell the truth. He reveals that her family's divine power only awakens if the child is raised properly, confirming her suspicion that he's unnervingly perceptive. Kya! Visha erupts in fury, realizing he's been trying to use her all along as he claims no one understands her better than him. Gritting her teeth, she bites his shoulder and complains that it hurts, while he thinks that admitting she's right is frustrating. He bluntly asks if she needs the bathroom, which only enrages her more as she yanks his braids and yells at him. Visha sighs, concluding that despite everything, choosing to ally with this man is still her best option. She pokes his chin and calls his face audacious, and he coolly thanks her for the compliment. Declaring it wasn't a compliment, she tells him they're leaving, and he calmly agrees. As they walk out of the grand chamber, a brown-haired man watches in shock, while Visha gives a little wave. A smiling red-haired woman approaches and asks Visha if her conversation went well. Visha pats the step below her throne, ordering the black-haired man to sit down. He obediently sits down at her feet on the step of the throne. Holding out her hand in a commanding gesture, she orders him to kneel. She places her hand on his bowed head and, with a serious expression, appoints him as her father. A faint smirk appears on his face as she demands that he raise her properly and well. He announces that by her command he has earned the right to be her guardian, and on the day she, Vishnanel, comes of age, he promises to return the throne to the house of Kisomalos. The newly appointed father holds his daughter, both looking toward a triumphant future. The powerful new duo stands united, ready to claim their destiny. A blonde man, the former emperor, is tied up and dragged away screaming Visha's name as he's transferred to the detached palace. The new father holds a pouting Visha while kicking the struggling emperor away, as she thinks him a thick-headed fool. He warns Visha that their struggle isn't over yet, but she just pats his chest and calls him a big oaf. He insists he is father, not a big oaf. She retorts she is Visha, not princess, and tells him to make the declaration. Watched by the red-haired woman and brown-haired man, a royal declaration begins for the year 8173 of Narak reckoning. Visha proudly proclaims Ende Chiron the new emperor and declares the dawn of the first year of Ende. Holding a cheering Visha, the new emperor Ende raises a victorious fist. Wham! His triumphant stance solidifies the start of a new reign. The grand throne room stands ready for its new rulers. A royal decree is officially signed, naming Vishnanel Lorowi Kisamalos as the sole heir. The document condemns the former emperor, Halatra, to execution and formally appoints Ende Chiron as acting emperor. Visha cleverly plans to take official credit for the palace raid, a move that both protects Ende and gives her leverage over him. A guard reports that the chief ministers have gathered, and Ende orders them brought into the audience chamber. The assembled ministers stare forward in absolute speechless shock. The lead minister recognizes the man on the throne, fearfully muttering that he is a mage. As the nobles tremble in fear, Ende assures their safety so long as they don't oppose him, then challenges any dissenters to raise their hand. A noble holds a blade to Ende's throat, threatening him. The minister stands frozen, shocked to see the princess present. Visha sits on Ende's lap, declaring that she will be the one to decide. As the former emperor is shown bound, the nobles are horrified to learn Visha will choose his execution method. Her thoughts are simple and fiery, burning. She cheerfully proposes burning him at the stake, declaring it filial piety since her mother was burned alive. Visha's fiery demand terrifies the court, who call her a daughter of flames. Tusk, an elderly noblewoman, silently calls the child a ruthless wench. The old woman immediately regrets thinking such vile words about her highness. Visha sweetly informs the terrified woman that she'll remember her insolence for 30 years. Ende asks if he should kill the woman, but Visha spares her, deeming her too useful. Nod, her father agrees not to kill her as she smiles, pleased with the outcome. Recalling their bond of fate, she affectionately calls him a big oaf. Father and daughter share a determined look, ready to face their future together. As she sleeps, congratulatory voices for the heir wake her. The voice praises her for winning over Chiron, and she recognizes it instantly. A radiant, golden-haired man suddenly appears, making her scream in shock. He explains that her bond with Chiron has restored enough of his divine power for him to manifest. Whoa, she asks in awe if it's really Lord Kisamalos, who internally calls her a fool. Lord Kisamalos looks slightly flustered by her reaction. She explains she's never received a divine message before, embarrassing the god. She scratches her head, confused why a father-daughter bond worked when she thought living recklessly would restore her power. He clarifies that she must also gather allies to build her divine power. She wonders if acquiring 100 fathers would work. The exasperated god laments that all his heirs are blockheads. He sighs, preparing to correct her misunderstanding. He explains that bonds also include the devotion of vassals and the trust of the people. He explains that love is power, which is why the previous rulers failed. Raising her hand from a tiny desk, she eagerly says she understands one thing. He holds a glowing star, promising to reveal the fastest way to build divine power. He grandly announces the answer. Take 100 lovers, earning a furious "you jerk" from Visha. She angrily refuses, declaring she'll have one husband as he thinks that's not how fate works for their family. Remembering the misery her promiscuous father and grandfather caused her mother, she reaffirms her vow to live differently. She frantically waves her hands, refusing the absurd idea of having 100 lovers. He cheekily suggests that saying "I love you" doesn't require taking responsibility, but she just calls him a jerk again. Calling him garbage, she points an accusing finger at the smug god. His divine message suddenly breaks down into sheep-like bleating, confusing her. As he fades away bleeding, she yells in frustration at being left with such ridiculous advice. The scene transitions to a sunlit, elegant room. Visha lets out a weary sigh, still processing the strange encounter. She lies on her bed, exhausted from her divine vision. Now in a new pink dress, she steps outside with a maid. Following the chaos, the palace is on high alert with extra guards assigned to protect the princess. A red-haired knight approaches to check on her, and she notes he is a new face. The knight proudly announces that they are the Knights of House Kiran. He explains the deposed emperor's forces are attacking the palace and that they are there to guarantee her safety. She pats his leg in acknowledgement, and the flustered knight declares it an honor to protect her. He privately wonders how they attracted a vulgar sheep, but quickly defends his peculiar but good-hearted majesty. Bee! A divine golden sheep appears, crying loudly about a damned lamb making noise. A maid happily points out that the golden sheep is the symbol of House Kisomalos. Visha smiles brightly, realizing Kiran's ascension to the throne is a good sign. A red-haired knight in a blue uniform draws his sword, vowing to wash away his sins with death. Hehe Visha dismisses her threat as a joke and cheerfully invites everyone to eat lamb. Visha orders the red-haired soldier to catch the sheep while telling a maid named Emiri to fetch the master cook. The red-haired man captures the golden sheep, who laments being woken up by all the noise. Visha orders the captured sheep brought to her, deciding it's best to kill it now. The maid Emiri returns with the nervous-looking head chef of the imperial princess's palace. B. Visha struggles with the bleeding sheep, excitedly announcing a full lamb menu for breakfast. The head chef respectfully informs her that the sheep is far too old to be eaten. Startled, Visha considers that eating a symbol of the imperial family is indeed strange. She orders the sheep to be taken far away, and the red-haired man agrees to leave it outside the palace. As the man carries the crying sheep away, it panics about being slaughtered by villagers, while Visha gets hungry. Visha decides to ask the cook for breakfast when a red-haired woman joyfully calls her name Bisha. The woman proposes a joint breakfast to review table etiquette, but Visha thinks they should eat at their own house. Visha announces she's going to the dining hall to dip rolls in her soup. Her aunt scolds her for forgetting etiquette rules, but Visha retorts, "That's how bullies live." The red-haired woman insists Visha is not a bully, comparing her unfavorably to her own perfectly mannered sister. Visha cheekily suggests her aunt should go live with her mother in the imperial mausoleum. The aunt playfully smothers a struggling Visha with 10 punishment kisses for her rude remark. A brown-haired man bursts in laughing, announcing an urgent message and a major problem from His Majesty Kiran, prompting Visha to wonder why he's laughing. He explains his glee comes from seeing Ende's furious face as he demands to see the princess. The man reveals that a woman from the Empress's quarters failed in an attempt to attack Ende, showing her bound on the floor. Learning the woman slept in the ex-emperor's bedroom, Visha thinks she must have a stomach of steel. The red-haired woman and the brown-haired man laugh, with the woman planning to give the newcomer advice on court life. Holding Visha, the red-haired woman suggests they go see the vulgar woman's wrinkled face. They arrive in a dark chamber where the bound, pink-haired woman kneels before a pensive Ende. Upon entering, Visha and her aunt recoil from the strong smell of cigarettes. Ende wonders how to punish the woman while putting out a cigarette on the bed, an act Visha finds bold. Crossing his arms, Ende looks pensive as Visha realizes the cigarette isn't the important issue. A thought bubble explains that while illegitimate children are to be killed, the woman should be returned to her family. Visha senses something is off as she watches the captive, pondering if the woman crossed the line while sleeping. The pink-haired woman suddenly screams, "Impotent bastard!" making Visha realize her assumption was wrong. Wahahaha! The brown-haired man collapses in laughter, mockingly repeating the insult. Ende glares angrily, wondering how House Lorowy raised a child who knows such a word. The red-haired woman frantically tries to deny responsibility, admitting she only said impotent 20 times in front of Visha, who silently thanks her for the confession. The brown-haired man whispers to Visha that Ende doesn't see people as people, prompting her to wonder what species he is. The man is baffled by her question, asking if she means a chimpanzee or a panda. Giving a thumbs up, he assures her she'll understand Ende eventually, but Visha privately decides she doesn't want to. Visha declares that the woman can be a mistress but never an empress, and any potential children must be eliminated. The pink-haired woman, Trimuti, desperately pleads her innocence, insisting she would never harbor thoughts of betrayal. The red-haired woman proposes castration as an alternative punishment, horrifying Trimuti, who screams it's the same as killing him. Endi orders his guards to follow Visha's decision and remove the woman, who continues to curse him as she's dragged away. As she's taken, the woman curses all of House Kisamalos, leaving Visha to wonder why she's only insulting them. The brown-haired man comforts a quiet Visha, telling her to ignore the bad words. The red-haired woman turns to address Ende, calling out to him. She admits she's starting to like him for listening to Visha, but he coldly states he wasn't trying to please House Loroi. Growl. The red-haired woman fumes at his tantrum, muttering, "Tusk, these stubborn Loroi heads," as he walks away. Visha calmly tells her aunt to stop, explaining that Bumgo doesn't like the Loroi. Her aunt is confused, not remembering any fight, as Visha realizes it must have happened during their ancestors' time. Visha has a sudden insight, suspecting her maternal grandmother was behind everything but confused since the Loroi and Kiron families never had contact. A vision reveals a question. Why did the maternal grandmother want Kiron eliminated? Ende stands on a balcony, telling Visha and her aunt to sit for a meal. As screams echo from the palace, a notice confirms the execution of pro-emperor faction remnants. Visha stares at her soup as an unseen speaker marvels at her strong stomach. Holding a newspaper, Ende announces he is changing Vishunahel's tutor. The red-haired aunt furiously objects, but Ende asserts his authority as the emperor and Visha's father. While Visha cringes in embarrassment, Ende mentions the former chief chamberlain was quite enthusiastic about the new tutor. Visha drops her fork in shock as Ende declares classes will start tomorrow, and she thinks of the chamberlain. She recoils, realizing her new tutor is the old woman who oversees all the palace servants. Visha fumes that the old woman is a terrible teacher, but she can't argue properly, while Ende thinks her protests are starting again. Ende announces that her lessons will now include imperial studies, economics, and philosophy. The aunt argues that Visha can't even read properly yet, but Ende challenges her claim. He traps her, asking how she could have read Martin's Republican dialogue then. Ende smirks, stating that her reading that book is all the proof he needs. Visha panics, realizing she can't slack off anymore and must study diligently under the strict new tutor. Deciding on a new tactic, Visha winks and resolves to pretend to be dumb. As Ende prepares to leave, Visha suddenly starts acting like a child, begging her daddy to catch a butterfly. Her act continues until an annoyed Ende grabs her, demanding she listen to him. Ende bans her aunt, Loroi, from the princess's palace for a week, leaving her stunned. He turns his back, refusing to attend Visha's class. Visha throws a tantrum, clinging to his leg and screaming that she hates studying. Ende majestically announces his first day as emperor, while Visha continues her protest at his feet. He walks away as she collapses to the floor, still wailing about catching a butterfly. While an official speaks in the audience chamber, Visha continues her tantrum on the floor, yelling that she hates studying. A flustered official tries to give his report over Visha's continued screaming. Thrashing on the ground, Visha screams for a butterfly, her tantrum echoing through the hall. Exhausted from her protest, Visha falls sound asleep. With a cough, Visha wakes up with a start. Confused, she realizes she's back in her room, not the audience chamber. Stretching, she remembers falling asleep mid-protest and panics, realizing he never canceled her classes. She furiously punches her pillow, blaming the damned people for tiring her out and causing her to fall asleep. A voice calling, "Princess!" interrupts her frustration, and she looks up in surprise. A red-haired man with a scar presents a gift from the emperor, a beautiful butterfly in a glass case. Visha scoffs, thinking he's trying to appease her with a gift after forcing her to study. Her eyes widen in wonder as she gets a closer look at the butterfly. Inside the terrarium, a vibrant blue butterfly rests among delicate white roses. The man explains that the emperor caught it himself in the palace greenhouse. Visha realizes with a shock that catching the butterfly was his personal business. Overcome with joy, she giggles uncontrollably, completely won over by the thoughtful gift. As the man promises to report her delight, Visha excitedly turns to her maid, Bonini. She eagerly orders her maid, Emiria, to bring colored paper and a pen. Lying on her bed, Visha carefully writes a thank you note. Her note thanks him for the butterfly, then demands he cancel her classes. She hands the origami-adorned note to her maid to deliver to the emperor. The maid suggests placing the beautiful butterfly gift near Visha's bed. Visha thinks it over, tapping her chin thoughtfully. She dismisses the idea, calling the butterfly gross up close and ordering it to be released later. Another maid with wavy reddish-brown hair announces she is going to ride her bicycle. Visha excitedly receives a rubber duck as her maids express relief that she's finally acting her age. Her aunt watches solemnly as Visha studies diligently, reflecting that the child always suppressed her desire to play. A maid's narration explains that Visha would always reject things she wanted for the sake of dignity. A brown-haired maid laments that she and the other maids could only watch, as they couldn't act without orders. The maid thinks to herself that despite being a mere servant, she truly wishes for the princess to be happy. The narrator recalls that after losing the empress, Visha also had to endure that incident as a crying toddler. The story flashes back to the first Emily, a faceless maid with long teal hair who served when Visha was much younger. The narrator explains that Emily was the head of the maids and a trusted confidant to the empress. As Visha trusted Emily more than anyone, the narration declares that the ensuing catastrophe was unavoidable. While accompanying the empress, Emily unfortunately attracted the unwanted attention of the emperor. Empress Elizabeth died shortly after the birth of her son Albert. The cause of death was believed to be a uterine hemorrhage, but there were rumors of poisoning. She was 22 years old. Her son Albert became emperor. The emperor summoned Emily to his bedchamber, but when she refused, he had her severely beaten. Emily's wounds from the beating eventually became infected. As the first Emily passed away, a young Visha watched as her body was carried out. The devastating shock of Emily's death hit the young princess with overwhelming force. Visha wailed uncontrollably for Emily, running a high fever for 2 days while a maid tried to comfort her. The reddish-brown-haired maid holds the crying princess, calling out to her highness. When Visha finally wakes, the maid informs her that Emily's funeral is over, and Visha weakly asks for her. Confused, Visha asks who Emily is, having completely forgotten her existence due to the trauma. From that day forward, the princess began calling every maid in her palace Emily. Back in the present, a smiling Visha rides her bicycle while a brown-haired maid watches over her. Visha carelessly bumps into a servant and yells at him, prompting her maid to worry about her increasingly coarse language. The brown-haired maid clenches her fist, vowing that the Emily squad will serve the princess with even greater devotion. The maids are shown training furiously, throwing gratitude punches in a fountain for her highness. Enveloped in a dark aura, the maids declare their absolute loyalty, as an observer notes the palace's odd prestige. The intimidating Emily squad surrounds a terrified official, demanding luxury goods from the treasury, and he quickly caves. The maids strike a dynamic pose, declaring they will become the greatest corps of ladies-in-waiting for their princess. Visha happily rides her bike, followed closely by her fiercely loyal, aura-enveloped maids. Visha beams with pure joy as she rides through the palace grounds. Taking a break, she eagerly chugs from a water bottle. Kia! She splashes water on her face, declaring that it's the best feeling after working up a sweat. A maid and a male attendant clap enthusiastically, praising how magnificently her highness drinks cold water. Visha puffs out her chest, thinking she loves being a princess on such a fulfilling day. An old woman suddenly appears behind her, startling Visha as she asks if she enjoyed herself. Visha screams in terror and the old woman calmly chides her for being discourteous. Realizing it's the monstrous old head maid, Visha frantically pedals away, fearing she'll be forced to study if caught. The head maid points forward, coolly ordering her attendants to seize the fleeing princess. As 2 men capture her, Visha protests that she's the rightful heir, but they insist she must attend her lessons. Visha continues to struggle and scream insults at the wrinkled old hag as she is carried away for her academic assessment. The head maid laughs heartily, unfazed by the insults and noting that wrinkles are natural at her age. Held firmly by the attendants, a terrified Visha can only stare at the insane, terrifying monster of a head maid. Visha suddenly finds herself in the study room, wondering how she was dragged inside. As Visha continues to scream and ride her tricycle in protest, the head maid calmly tells her it's not all bad news. The head maid holds up a test paper, offering an exemption from all classes if Visha scores a perfect 100. Visha immediately stops her tantrum and asks when the test begins, surprising the head maid with her sudden cooperation. The head maid explains the 1-hour multiple-choice test format, and Visha confidently agrees. Visha smirks, thinking that questions designed for 5-year-olds are laughable since she's already mastered the royal curriculum. Seeing questions about calculus and dialects, she scoffs, believing the test will be ridiculously easy. After just 30 minutes, Visha slams her completed test down, surprising the head maid. She proudly presents her paper, beaming with absolute certainty. As the head maid begins grading, Visha mentally taunts the old hag, anticipating her regret. Visha happily dances with the maid, telling her to sound the trumpet, for she will be playing all day tomorrow. Visha laughs gleefully as the old woman looks on, understanding the situation. The old woman muses that the lesson was strange but can now proceed as planned. Visha points triumphantly, declaring victory over the old woman. The old woman smiles, promising to return tomorrow to serve Her Highness. When Visha celebrates her perfect score, the woman reminds her that only 100 would exempt her from lessons. The woman reveals the test was out of 101 points, and Visha scored a perfect 101. Gasp! Realizing she's been tricked, Visha angrily declares the exam invalid. The woman cackles, mocking Visha for falling into the same trap as her ancestor. Visha throws a tantrum demanding the woman's head, but the woman laughs, protected by the emperor. As the grand palace is shown, Visha's screams of hating her studies echo. The next morning, the scene shifts to the princess's palace. Visha and a black-haired maid with a large pack stand ready to leave. Stepping outside, Visha decides to treat every day as a field trip. Bah! A sudden bleat makes Visha stop in her tracks. A giant golden sheep appears, leaving the maid speechless. The sheep stares forward menacingly, its eyes glowing a furious red. Visha panics, wondering how the annoying sheep got in again. "Ba ba!" 2 golden sheep cry out, making a racket. Visha frantically tries to silence the bleating sheep, fearing they'll wake everyone. She watches in disbelief as one of the golden sheep balances perfectly on a large ball. The trick reminds her of a palace clown she once watched with a maid. The sheep performs its act flawlessly, and Visha begrudgingly admits it must have practiced. Deciding to ignore it, she tells her maid Emily to leave, shocking the performing sheep. Back! The sheep tumbles off the ball and charges after them. The sheep latches onto Visha's leg, earning a furious threat to be eaten. The crazy sheep brat cries dramatically while clinging to her dress. Bah! Visha and Emmy flee as the persistent sheep gives chase. Safely away from the chaos, Visha and Emily enjoy a drink under a tree. Visha smiles brightly, ready to head down for lunch after her break. A palace-wide announcement warns that Lady Kazelnu Leroy is about to deploy the Billion explosion. A red megaphone blares, urging all personnel to brace for the blast and stay away from the gates. Click. 2 men coolly put on protective sunglasses to watch the show. Wearing similar glasses, Visha wonders why her aunt is using a skill usually reserved for the battlefield. The narrator suggests her aunt, the red-haired Kazelnu Leroy, has taken a liking to the brown-haired Ende. Visha cheerfully offers to explain the current political situation. She explains that since the former emperor's ousting, traitors have been demanding her release. Their leader is identified as Zephyros, one of the empire's 3 great powers. The explanation continues, focusing on Zephyros's authority. The Zephyros faction is fiercely loyal to the Kisamalos imperial bloodline. Therefore, they refuse to accept Ende Chiron, a man with no connection to the throne. Their plan was to depose Ende and install Visha as the rightful heir. By firing the billion explosion, Aunt Leroy is sending a message. It's a political statement that she, the princess's guardian, has sided with Chiron. It also reflects Ende's will, showing he doesn't need the princess's influence to protect the castle. Rumble, the evacuation is a formality, the blast is just for show. Visha explains that, for Leroy, taking a liking to someone is also a powerful threat. Back at the picnic, Visha and Emily sit in thoughtful silence. Lying on their blanket with goggles on, they anticipate the explosion. A massive, glowing projectile streaks down from the sky toward the palace. Boom! The palace gate is blown away in a spectacular fiery explosion. Visha calls the explosion a spectacle, while her maid, Emily, praises Lady Leroy's amazing power. Sipping her drink, Visha muses that since Bumgora is the emperor now, they can figure things out themselves. A man with a mustache and sunglasses smirks, confident the blast will silence the vicious bastards of the Zephyros faction. Teask. Visha worries that the neutral factions are now the bigger problem. She scorns the neutral nobles as chameleon bastards, noting their inaction is a ploy to side with the eventual winner. Bah. As they relax, Visha and Emily are startled by the bleat of a nearby golden sheep. The panting golden sheep appears, making Visha wonder if it followed them all the way there. Ugh. Visha sighs and tells a weary Emily they're moving to another tree. They quickly pack up their picnic as the golden sheep cries out, trying to get their attention. Visha beams with a mischievous, triumphant smile. The golden sheep and its human spirit form cry dramatically, heartbroken at being ignored after performing a balancing act. The second day of skipping lessons begins with Visha happily carrying a bucket of dessert. Slurp! She imagines devouring her treat so messily it would make her aunt scream in horror. Kayak. Visha plans to find Emily to share some ice cream, but stops short as someone blocks her path. A smiling, pink-haired man stands before her, holding a large box of supplies. Visha's eyes widen in shocked recognition. She points, identifying him as Marshmallow, her old prison buddy and a corrupt minister's brother, who thinks her memory is remarkably specific. He laughs gratefully and formally introduces himself as Tarquinius Krishna. Visha dismisses his name and orders him to change it to Marshmallow immediately, an order he meekly accepts. She asks how he escaped prison, but he explains that Lord Ende granted a special pardon to several political prisoners. Noticing his box, Visha asks about it, and he explains it's for his new job. Oh ho ho ho, an elderly woman named Risto appears with a sinister laugh, announcing she's been appointed to oversee Visha's lessons, much to Visha's horror. Visha looks devastated, lamenting the tragedy of meeting a former comrade in arms as an enemy. Yelling, "Wait!" Visha turns and tries to flee down the hall. Marshmallow calls out to Her Highness with a sly smile. Gulp. He tempts her to stop, warning she'll miss out on an incredible item, and Visha pauses, intrigued. She turns back, watching him expectantly in the grand hall. Visha grips her dessert bucket, realizing with grim determination that the day has finally come. Marshmallow smirks, reminding her not to take him lightly as a flashback shows her being held by her new father, Bumgol. The flashback shows Bumgol accepting bribes from corrupt ministers under the guise of punishing them. Visha recalls that the strategist who supplied the bribe lists back then was none other than Marshmallow. She clenches her fist, vowing to silence the deceitful man with her Kisomalos assassination spoon-throwing technique. Behold this. Marshmallow cheerfully presents a pink and green toy to the princess. Ta-da! He demonstrates how the toy makes a ball float, and Visha gasps in amazement. Marshmallow proposes a card game. If she wins, she gets the toy. But if he wins, she must accept her lessons. Thrilled by the offer, Visha eagerly asks what kind of game they'll be playing. He explains it's a simple memory game of finding matching pairs, causing Visha to worry he's too smart for her. Visha suggests a handicap, demanding she get 2 turns for every one of his. Marshmallow readily agrees to her terms and allows her to choose the location. Visha triumphantly orders an attendant to prepare her bedchamber for the game. She playfully practices with the new toy, puffing her cheeks to make the ball float. Visha sits like a tiny queen in her chair, confidently using the toy pipe. She realizes too late she's been tricked into a 2-hour history lesson, as Marshmallow gives detailed explanations with every matched pair. Elsewhere, Ende calmly reads a book and sips coffee, laughing about the lovely weather. Wahaha! A brown-haired man laughs, telling Ende the princess was tricked into a lesson. Ende calls him a rotten bastard for teasing him. Setting his book down, Ende asks if Visha picked up her delinquent attitude from Loroi. Reflected in a mirror, Visha furiously retorts that she learned it from him, but he coolly blames Loroi instead. Visha puffs her cheeks in anger, mimicking smoking with her toy pipe. Ende sighs, concluding the late empress must have smoked a pipe, and warns Visha not to learn the bad habit. In a cute doodle, Visha tells Beamgol to knock it off, but he insists it's fine for him because he's an adult. Acting like an old man, Visha chides Beamgol and demands to know why he wanted to see her. Ende asks if she truly had no reason to call for him, as Visha looks on nervously. Visha demands he cancel her lessons, but he turns to leave, prompting her to yell for him to wait. Visha cheerfully declares she doesn't want to be emperor and tells him to ruin the country first, piquing his curiosity. After dismissing common vices, she hesitantly suggests starting a war of conquest. Ende calmly considers her idea of starting a war. Visha sagely explains that an obsession with expansion leads to an empire's collapse, while Ende adds that a nomadic people once fell for that very reason. Recalling how Leroy held a military meeting with the Brigitte sisters, Ende slyly suggests adding military studies to Visha's lessons. Outraged by his trickery, Visha slams her teacup down and yells at the crazy bastard. Ende calmly announces he has free time, so they'll spend it having fun together, much to Visha's continued fury. He tells her the Brigitte sisters wanted to play house and suggests they start now, leaving her to wonder what to do. Visha fumes, annoyed that Ende is doing as he pleases while she has no idea how to play house. She clenches her fist, a plan beginning to form. Remembering a brown-haired boy named Choco who seemed close with Ende, Visha devises a mischievous plan to make him regret his suggestion. A spark of determination appears in Visha's eyes. Visha begins assigning roles. Bumgor will be the mother, and Choco will be the daughter, much to the boy's surprise. When Visha tells him to forget it if he dislikes the role, Choco reluctantly agrees to play the daughter. A maid announces that the playhouse set has been prepared for the emperor and princess. Thrilled, Visha declares it's time to begin and excitedly runs toward the playhouse. Visha kicks open the door, shouting like an angry husband demanding to be greeted by his wretched wife. Recalling a scandalous play popular with the nobles, Visha decides to reenact its shocking drama for her unwitting playmates. Her plan is immediately thwarted when Ende calmly states that a husband and wife are equals. Standing in the doorway, Visha defiantly asks why she should have to greet him. Ende's expression darkens as he sternly tells her to sit down while he's still speaking nicely. From the doorway, Visha realizes her intimidating act has failed completely against the emperor's stoic demeanor. Ende lists all the work he's done for her, from hiring servants to paying taxes, all for her comfort. Visha nervously notes that despite everything, the house feels cold and lacks warmth. He coldly tells her that for unconditional love, she should get a dog or live with her parents. Visha furiously retorts that if he won't love her, he should get a dog instead of chasing her. Ende remarks that even marriage is just a contract, prompting Visha to dramatically declare, "Let's break up." Choco draws his sword, admiring Ende's thinking. With a grin, Choco declares he'll take Visha instead, calling Ende father and leaving Visha bewildered. Ende grabs Choco, saying the brat has finally shown his teeth, as Choco accuses him of shooting first. Choco is thrown back, dramatically accusing his father of the immoral act of intercepting him from his true love. Choco lunges, shouting that they aren't blood-related and that Visha, his dad, liked him first. Ende draws a gun on Choco, calling his love a misfortune and offering to protect him from it. The room erupts in a chaotic clash of energy. A horrified Visha realizes their impromptu play has become far more messed up than the one she was copying. As the two men fight with what appear to be real weapons, Visha understands things have gone too far. Visha desperately waves her hands, pleading for Choco and Beomgoli to stop their fight. As the fight intensifies, she worries that her new guardians are taking it too seriously and might actually die. Visha begins to cry, upset that they didn't listen to her pleas to stop. The head maid suddenly appears between them, shouting for them to stop their duel. With a look of pure fury, the head maid demands to know what they're doing. Visha runs to the head maid for comfort, crying her name as the maid looks down in concern. The head maid glares, her menacing shadow cast over the two kneeling men as she demands an explanation from the emperor. Cradling the crying princess, the head maid explains that Visha is only young and was naturally shocked by the scene. The head maid sternly tells Ende that his indifference and failure to recognize his own immense power has been his problem since childhood. A young Visha asks her grandma, the head maid, if she ever met Beomgoli when he was young. The head maid reacts with shock, thrusting Visha towards a man, as the princess asks what she means. As the brown-haired man tries to explain it's a misunderstanding about a book, the head maid yells, "Nonsense," leaving Visha wondering why she is being ignored. The head maid pivots, asking the man if he discussed the coronation schedule with the princess. The brown-haired man bluntly replies, "No." In a memory, the man scoffs at the idea of playing house, while another man beside him chuckles. The head maid fumes, thinking to herself that she should have killed them back then. As a man kneels, the emperor calls him rude and asks if he intends to cut his neck. The man collapses to the floor as the emperor states Visha told him not to kill, and the man praises his majesty for listening. The emperor declares he's grown up, while the head maid thinks he runs his mouth thoughtlessly. Visha watches them, concluding they must have met before, and wonders about their relationship. The head maid sighs, remarking that the schedule is extremely tight. A grand, winged carriage soars through the sky, as narration explains an envoy from Astia is arriving. With the envoy's arrival imminent, the man's coronation ceremony is scheduled for the very next day. The head maid insists the princess must attend the ceremony, but Visha flatly refuses. The head maid argues Visha's attendance is vital to legitimize the new, foundationless majesty, reminding her of her own concerns about biased historical records. Visha crosses her arms defiantly, declaring that children should stay out of politics. The head maid smirks cunningly, questioning the princess's statement. Visha stares in alarm as the head maid's sly grin widens. The princess gasps in shock, stammering, "What?" The narration introduces the legendary young hero Hesperon in a grand portrait. Because his mother was a commoner, Hesperon was never recognized by the royal family. At 14, he went to war and took his first life, quickly becoming a legend. After suppressing a rebellion at 15, he expanded the empire's territory to the east. The story concludes that he was a hero who sacrificed his life in the bloom of his youth. Visha is completely captivated, her eyes sparkling with adoration for the hero. Kia! The head maid calls Hesperon a lowly bastard, and Visha erupts, screaming that he's the young hero. Awestruck, Visha realizes that if she is 5, then Hesperon must be 15. She swoons, thinking she never imagined she'd get to meet her hero, Hesperon, in person. Visha desperately begs her grandma to let them meet, calling him her lifelong love and complimenting her pretty wrinkles. Giving 2 enthusiastic thumbs up, she praises the head maid for having a temper milder than any mother-in-law. The head maid notes, Visha is bad at praise and teaches that one must be able to lie to be a good emperor, leaving the princess confused. Visha throws a tantrum, refusing to be emperor, but the head maid warns she won't meet Hesperon then. In a daydream, Visha complains about paperwork and wishes to restore a lord so she can live a life of leisure. The emperor suddenly interrupts, remarking that he also went to war at 15. He angrily demands that they marvel at him instead of that bastard. The emperor clenches his collar, insisting they admire him instead of a loser like Hesperon. The head maid dismisses his outburst as nonsense while Visha looks on in confusion. The head maid reveals that the emperor Helbatro was once defeated and captured, and his mother erased the humiliating record. The emperor insists the process matters more than the result, and refuses to speak with her further. The head maid offers Visha a deal: attend the coronation and greet the envoy, and she can meet the lowborn hero. Visha and the emperor share a thought, agreeing the ugly old hag is making a fake promise. In a violent flashback, the head maid kicks the emperor, screaming that he's an annoyance who just won't die. The emperor blocks her punch, thinking she's just as annoying and that Bumgora is the type to talk himself into a beating. Back in the present, the head maid complains of old age aches before suddenly recalling the time. The head maid confirms that Helbetro's execution is this afternoon, and the emperor grimly acknowledges it. Visha is ordered to return to her palace and whines, questioning why. The head maid explains that she must stay put during her father's execution to avoid spreading nasty rumors. Visha happily declares she's going to watch too. The head maid thinks Visha is a vicious bitch, prompting Visha to angrily ask why she keeps calling her that. Visha furiously defends a man the maid insulted, stating that while he might be a fond memory to the maid, he was always trash to her, so the maid shouldn't judge. The brown-haired man comforts Visha, agreeing with her and telling the old woman to be quiet. As the man picks her up, Visha asks in surprise if Bumgora was friends with the blockhead, but he explains he only did it for money. Visha sighs in disgust, thinking she would rather die than do something for money. The brown-haired man looks away sadly, admitting he had no other choice back then and wishes he'd never met him. As Visha and the man agree, a hand slams down on a table. The head maid erupts in fury, blaming them for causing Helbetro to go astray. Thud! A chair flies through the air as the man holds a screaming Visha, insisting it's not his fault. Visha watches the maid's temper, thinking she might have been a bit too harsh. She smiles deviously, deciding she'll just curse him behind his back from now on. The story flashes back to a young, black-haired boy in a formal blue suit who introduces himself as Ende Chiron. He explains he was born an ordinary child of the ducal house and shows himself as a baby playing with blocks. As a boy, he excelled at swordsmanship but remained stoic, even when another boy praised him. A friend asks why he hasn't been able to keep up with lessons, but Ende stares blankly. He took pride in his ordinariness, even as a man considered giving him special lessons. Not long after, his parents suddenly passed away, shown by a lonely church in the rain. Kneeling before their graves, he cried, feeling as if the ground had vanished beneath him. As lightning strikes, he realizes his uncle was responsible, looking up at the man holding an umbrella over him. Despite the tragedy, his childhood wasn't all bad, as he was brought to the imperial palace to be an attendant and friend to the prince. A young blonde boy on a throne, Helbetro, scoffs at the idea of being his friend, which is ironically where Ende met him. Helbedor was already infamous for his cruelty, shown ordering a man to be flogged and thrown in a dungeon. Ende recalls enduring constant torment, like being hung upside down from a tree while Helbetro smirks. Thud! Thud! He was brutally beaten with a wooden sword for ridiculous reasons. Lying bruised on the ground, Ende believed Helbetro hoped he would die, but he survived, shown recovering alone under a tree. He realized Helbetro was not only a blockhead, but also an extremely sensitive person, as a younger Helbetro looks at him with worry. Helbetro was a strange person who grew attached if you simply stayed by his side, shown running toward arresting Ende. When Ende was injured, Helbetro would seek him out, clearing his throat awkwardly by Ende's sickbed. He tossed Ende a healing spirit stone, clumsily denying that he did it out of worry. Helbetro thinks to himself that Ende is a fool, lamenting that he wouldn't have to use such an expensive item if Ende hadn't been tormented. Holding the stone, Ende realizes he must look after the unpleasant bastard to keep him out of trouble. When Ende honestly expressed this thought, Helbetro angrily punched him and demanded the spirit stone back. Life became more comfortable, with Ende dutifully following Helbetro, who tells him to stop. However, the fickle Helbetro's attitude toward him changed once again. Ende recalls that while he could understand 10 things from hearing 1, Helbetro would hear 1 and forget 2, creating a gap between them. The distance grew until, at some point, Helbetro stopped talking to him entirely. A grown Ende looks on grimly, stating that this silence was the beginning of the catastrophe. One day, a letter arrived from Tanya Listo, Helbatro's tutor. As Ende walks through a hall, a voice urgently begs him to return to the duchy. An elderly woman, Tanya, grabs his arm, insisting that staying by the prince's side will only hurt him, though the narration states she was begging him to stay and protect Helbatro. When an order came from his uncle to leave, Tanya's plea gave him the reason to agree. After leaving the palace, Ende's life became a constant, brutal struggle to survive on the battlefield. Defeated and imprisoned, he waited in despair for death to claim him. A guard appears, opening the door to his dark cell. He heard a rumor that Helbatro begged the emperor to pay a fortune to ransom him from the enemy. But regardless of the reason, he survived the battlefield and is seen riding away at sunset. Arg, upon inheriting his ducal title, he took bloody revenge, purging his uncle's entire household. Seated amidst the aftermath, Ende recalls his plan to eliminate anyone who could become a spark of rebellion. Ende recalls there was one cousin he couldn't kill. He knew his young cousin had great potential and might have killed him in an all-out fight. To survive in a ruthless world, he chose not to cross that dangerous bridge. Standing before a fiery city, Ende tells his cousin to accept him as a guardian, as he has no intention of hurting him. Chaco clenches his sword, exclaiming that Ende's revenge was justified and that he should have said so sooner. Ende reflects that the boy was simple-minded enough to be won over easily. The two men shake hands before the burning city, sealing their new alliance. He states that he never intended to live arrogantly as the Duke forever. His only plan was to hold the title until his late brother's young son came of age. Not long after, the emperor passed away and Helbator took the throne. Ende explains that he left his cousin in charge of the domain and then entered the imperial prison to keep tabs on Helbatro. While locked up, he heard nothing but bad news about the new emperor. He expected Helbatro to be incompetent and obsessed with women, but an addiction to drugs was an unpleasant surprise. Ende recalls that while Helbatro's rampages were countless, he had never touched narcotics before. In his cell, he wonders where Helbatro could have gotten the drugs, as they're banned in the Empire. He speculates they came from Lorowe, a nation known for using drugs to boost soldier morale, a substance wiped out 50 years ago. A realization strikes him. Helbatro married Lorowe's eldest daughter. As he pictures their wedding, he wonders if the Empress was the one who supplied the drugs. He reasons that since the Empress is already dead, another member of the Lorowe family must be involved. Just then, Helbatro's daughter Visha arrives in the next cell, dramatically crying that she hates prison. A sinister grin spreads across his face as a new plan forms. Deciding he wants to talk to her, he prepares to make his move. With a powerful strike, he breaks down the wall between their cells, startling Visha. He discovers she is a funny little kid who happily chatters about how tasty the greenhouse strawberries are. Finding her even more foolish than young Helbatro, he passes her a basket and feels a pang of sadness when she promises to return. His eyes glint as he notes that the little fool came right back. Visha stands blushing before him after he's been beaten by a guard she calls the Big Fool. This event prompts him to go straight to Helbatro's palace that night. He grabs Helbatro, intending only to warn him for laying a hand on a child. Seeing Helbatro drugged and pathetically mistaking him for the Empress, he slaps him to his senses. He beats Helbatro just enough to not kill him, and then calmly walks back to his cell. That night, his household god, a centaur named Chiron, appears in his dream. He recalls that the normally gentle Chiron would appear in his dreams to beat him senseless whenever he was angry. Punch Chiron hits him, yelling at him to play nicely with his friend, just as he did when Ende was expelled from the palace. The god beats him again, recalling when he purged Uncle Milga and questioning his humanity. This time, however, Chiron admits he can't think of a reason for the beating. He lands hard on the ground after the powerful blow. When asked why he's being hit, Chiron reveals that he has traveled 18 years back in time. Chiron explains it's because in the future, he had the last heir of Kisomalos torn apart. The god of Kisomalos gave up his divine power to a god of time to turn back the clock, even having to borrow more. The man correctly deduces that Chiron was the one who helped, and the god confirms it, calling him a fox. Chiron explains that because he felt responsible for the man's mistake, he shared his power, causing his rank to fall to that of a low-class god. The man realizes the gravity of his actions, and Chiron confirms the price for turning back time must be paid again in 18 years. Chiron furiously demands that he take responsibility for everything. Defiantly, the man states that if the so-called heir died, they probably deserved it. Enraged, Chiron grabs him, revealing the heir is the little girl in the next cell and again demands he take responsibility. A powerful punch sends him flying as Chiron warns him against shouldering the karma. He jolts awake from the dream with a dreadful feeling. Looking at the naive, sleeping Visha, he wonders if she will truly grow up to be trash executed by dismemberment. Looking at the sleeping Visha, he wonders how he should treat this child now. A promotional image shows a black-haired man tenderly holding the young blonde girl. He sees her as a cute kid now, but recalls her grim future as worthless trash who will ruin the country. Ende reflects that Helbutro was a decent guy before he met the woman from Loroi and ponders the meaning of responsibility. He concludes that, with Helbutro lost to drugs, protecting that brat Visha is the only way to preserve the Kisamalos bloodline. Sitting up with new resolve, he realizes the time for repentance isn't over yet. He decides to stay until his nephew comes of age, a decision that causes the young man to frantically scribble a warning not to come out. He admits he pitied the child, but, bound by a promise to himself, felt he had no choice but to coldly turn away. He confidently declares he is 3.7 billion times more capable of raising her than Helbutro. He decides it's better not to sympathize with her as she's destined to become trash anyway, as he is shown feeding a gagged Visha. Despite his resolve, he can't help but think she's cute, especially since she resembles Helbutro. Surrounded by flowers, he finally decides to raise her himself, certain he'll do a better job. However, while he was debating this, the child caused a huge incident. Visha innocently places her hand on his and forgives his sins, a gesture that emotionally shatters him. In the name of the true bloodline of Kisamalos, her forgiveness manifests as a glowing sigil on his chest. Holding her, he thinks her ability to recklessly forgive someone's sins shows she's still lacking. He comically interprets her forgiveness as her official permission for him to become her guardian and good father. Wham! Feeling as if he has been given the green light, he declares that nothing is holding him back anymore. After studying parenting books, Ende shocks his nephew by declaring they will strike the imperial palace and that he's trained an elite unit for the job. Visha stands on a throne and officially appoints him as her father, commanding him to raise her splendidly. Believing the father's role is important, he resolves to raise her with devotion, studying books on child development. The head maid holds a wailing Visha, looking absolutely furious at the man. Just as in his youth, he gets thoroughly scolded by a furious Madame Listo. Holding the sleeping child, he decides she needs a pet and friends to aid her growth. He notes Visha's strange interest in war and decides that letting her watch a battlefield might be a good experience. With Vishunathe's birthday coming soon, he realizes the timing for his plan is perfect. Holding Visha, he proudly announces that as her dad, he will provide everything for her. On the day of the imperial coronation, the name Vishunathe Rorowi Kisamalos is proclaimed throughout the Grand Hall. Visha holds up the golden crown, declaring Ende Chiron will act as emperor in her stead. She personally places the crown on his head, legitimizing his rule until she comes of age. He recalls that, unsurprisingly, most of the nobles were not thrilled with this turn of events. The narration states that the former emperor was burned at the stake the day before. Visha cheerfully dismisses any concerns, asking if anyone really thought she'd cry over her dead dad. She explains that she fulfilled her duty as a daughter by stuffing him with painkillers so he wouldn't suffer. With a sly smirk, she declares that the coronation itself isn't what truly matters. Kia ha ha! With a triumphant leap, Visha dismisses the court, announcing the ceremony is over. She calls out for her grandma, and the stern Tanya Listo appears before her. Visha runs joyfully towards her grandmother with her arms wide open. She eagerly asks her grandmother if she can finally meet Lord Hisfin. Striking a cute pose, she asks her grandma if her hard work doesn't make her adorable. Tanya reacts with disgust, while Visha pouts and demands a little respect. Relenting, Tanya agrees to call the outer palace, smugly asking if a lowborn would dare refuse her. Visha erupts in anger, furiously defending Lord Hysferon's honor. As Tanya shouts at her for spouting nonsense, Visha is sent flying backward with a scream. She dashes excitedly down the hall, thrilled to finally be meeting Lord Hysferon. Yahoo! As a maid announces Lord Hysferon's arrival, Visha radiates with pure, uncontainable joy. A stoic young man with black hair and a serious demeanor, Lord Hysferon, enters the room. Visha is instantly captivated, thinking his dark, gloomy, and dead eyes are incredibly cool and awesome. What? Overwhelmed with excitement, she promptly trips and faceplants on the hard floor. Lord Huron rushes forward asking if Her Highness is all right. Popping back up from her fall, Visha cheerfully insists she's perfectly fine. She formally introduces herself as Vishunata to the young hero, Lord Hysferon. Visha squeezes her eyes shut in a moment of pure, overwhelming shyness. The maids gasp in shock at the display, while Hysferon looks on awkwardly. Mortified, Visha realizes she completely screwed up their first meeting. Sitting across from him, she recalls how he kindly gave her a handkerchief, despite her embarrassing fall. She beams, calling him cool and kind before eagerly asking for his autograph. Hysferon humbly states that he is not someone worthy of her respect. Visha dismisses his modesty as nonsense, while her maid calls out her name in warning. A maid named Emiri rushes in with a healing spirit stone, but Visha waves her off, claiming she's fine. Looking at the minor scrape on her hand, Visha thinks the stone is overkill and apologizes. Hysferon reveals the healing power was used on him instead, showing an arm covered in bruises. Gasp. Visha is outraged, wondering why the Emperor isn't providing healing stones to the army. She explodes in a chibi tantrum, demanding to know if the Emperor supplies healing stones, while Hysferon calmly watches. As Hysferon vaguely mentions his background, Visha internally seethes at the shabby treatment her hero is receiving. She recalls his grim future, dying alone and overworked in the barracks at just 20. A teacup cracks as she realizes a simple spirit stone can't fix the abuse he's enduring. Visha leaps to her feet, demanding Emiri bring her a divine healing crystal at once. Emiri panics, stating the palace budget can't afford it, while Hysferon insists he's fine. Visha brushes off the concern, declaring they'll just eat watery meat soup to save money. She confidently demands the crystal, earning the swooning admiration of her maid for her kindness. The next morning dawns over the magnificent imperial palace. Clang! A spoon is angrily dropped. Visha slams her hands on the table, furious at the pathetic, watery soup she's been served. Kneeling, Emiri explains the budget was completely depleted, and they're all eating potatoes. A flashback shows Visha giving the expensive crystal to a hesitant Hysferon, warning he'll become a corpse without it. Visha feels guilty, realizing she can't let her hard-working maids starve because of her actions. With renewed determination sparkling in her eyes, she announces she has to see her papa. She performs a full formal bow on the floor before the Emperor Ende. Ende looks down with his arms crossed coolly, asking what she thinks she's doing. Still prostrate, Visha cheerfully explains it's her highest level bow to ask for a budget advance. He questions her identity as the princess after she gave a divine crystal to Hysferon. She beams, declaring she is, of course, his one and only precious daughter. Ende walks past, stepping on her dress as she clings to his leg, unimpressed by her claims of being precious. He relents, explaining that since he's collected damages from their enemies, her budget increase is no problem. Hooray! Ende lifts the overjoyed Visha high into the air. Holding her, he adds that there is one condition, and she eagerly asks what it is. Visha wails as he forbids skipping lessons and announces renovations to her palace. She negotiates for a new, extensive toy catalog, to which he agrees. Carrying a dejected Visha, Ende declares they'll start construction immediately. Visha pouts, assuming the renovations will just be minor building repairs. Yeah. She enters her room and lets out a blood-curdling scream of horror. She furiously points at the new, round, childish furniture, demanding to know where her fancy rosewood set went. Ende appears behind her, calmly reminding her that she happily accepted the deal. Visha whirls on him, screaming that it's not better and that she doesn't even have any friends. He coolly informs her she will now, revealing he's assigned a paid friend for her to play with. Handing her a file, Ende criticizes her social skills and dismisses Helbetro's past influence. He thinks to himself that he must avoid the same terrible outcome as with Helbetro. With a confident glint in his eye, Ende presents his perfect solution. After that, you have completed the task and you are presented with a congratulations screen. You will go to your third task once you click on it. A yellow sheep doll dashes away, revealing it keeps returning because of Visha. Grr, the angry sheep, grabs the document, reminding her it needs talented people. Grr. As the sheep rips the list to shreds, Visha wonders if sheep can get rabies. Ende coolly reveals it was just a copy, stunning the little sheep. Kneeling, Ende presents Visha with a new candidate for her friend. She looks at a portrait of a green-haired girl, thinking she looks cute. Visha excitedly points at the picture. As the sheep agrees, she's an excellent talent. Ende presents the yellow sheep on a leash, calling it a captured companion animal. He hands the leash to a baffled Visha, telling her to raise it well. With a charming wink, Ende tells Visha she can give her new pet a name. Announcing he's busy, he walks away, leaving Visha trembling with rage. Visha and the sheep, now leashed together, erupt in mutual, infuriated screaming. Their screams echo from the palace. Visha wants a friend, not a sheep. Elsewhere, the green-haired girl reads about Vishunata, the heir she must serve. She grimly reads on, referring to Visha as the one who will corrupt her. Visha watches in annoyance as a maid scolds the sheep for demanding meat. She recalls how Ende relentlessly beat her in badminton and board games before leaving. He even crushed her in top spinning, the one game she was confident she could win. Crying with frustration, Visha wails for him to let her win just once. A maid bursts in, announcing the arrival of Lady Achilles, surprising Visha. Visha eagerly runs to meet her, excited for a spineless, egoless, suck-up friend. With a huge, welcoming smile, Visha greets the arriving Lady Achilles. The green-haired girl, Shirley, gives an intensely formal and intimidating greeting. Visha is flustered, thinking Shirley's vibe is completely different from her picture. Shirley offers to be Visha's plaything, horrifying the young princess. Imagining Shirley as a marionette, Visha awkwardly suggests she should rest instead. Visha shows Shirley her new room, which Shirley accepts with overwhelming gratitude. She proudly presents a vast library as Shirley's new space. Shirley's eyes light up with joy, excitedly asking if all the books are for her. Annoyed that the wrong kind of friend arrived, Visha begrudgingly confirms it. Shirley ecstatically declares her love for learning, recalling how she was forbidden from it. Overcome with dark joy, Shirley cackles with glee in the middle of the library. Visha is now completely terrified, realizing her new friend must be truly crazy. As Shirley leaps toward her declaring her love, Visha screams for her maid, Emilia. The narration concludes that their first meeting was intense, and Lady Achilles was peculiar. Shirley is ecstatic to attend classes with a pink-haired tutor. Seeing her enthusiasm, Visha decides to offer her own homework to Shirley. Crying tears of pure joy, Shirley lovingly accepts the homework, pledging eternal loyalty. Deciding to return this scary lady, Visha tries to find Ende, only to be chased by Shirley. Her search is blocked by a sign for a top-secret military conference. Time passes to the day before her birthday, and Visha wonders why Ende is avoiding her. Her pink-haired tutor notices she's troubled and asks what's wrong. Visha complains that her new friend is a handful, and Ende refuses to see her. She briefly daydreams that he might be preparing a surprise birthday gift. But seeing the empty banquet hall, she concludes he doesn't even know it's her birthday. Leaning back in her chair, she sadly admits she was hoping for a small party. The next day, a voice wishes Vishnahel a happy birthday as she stands in a spotlight. A dramatically dressed Ende appears, announcing her 6th birthday gift is a fortress. Visha is left completely dumbfounded by his ridiculous present. Visha questions if Ende really captured the infamous Laura Rouge fortress. The narration describes the fortress as Medea Kingdom's nigh impenetrable, cannon-filled facility. Recalling how the coastal fortress blocked their empire's sea access, a military commander remembers discussing it with her sisters. Shirley excitedly reports the presence of 500 soldiers, asking Ende how he captured the fortress with so few men. Ende calmly corrects her, insisting she call him Your Majesty, not Father. A flashback shows a brown-haired warrior screaming, "Die, you bastard!" as he attacks Ende. The defeated warrior complains that Ende caused him so much trouble and ruined his expensive swords. Ende nonchalantly offers to buy him 10 new swords, to which the warrior eagerly agrees. Visha wonders about the sudden appearance of this man Choco, and again asks how the fortress was taken. Choco explains he infiltrated alone from the Medea side, exploiting their focus on defending against Kisomalos. Awestruck, Visha asks Choco if he really defeated 1,000 soldiers by himself. Choco bashfully admits he thought he was going to die after fighting 800, realizing he's been living with a monster. A voice declares that one man, single-handedly seizing a fortress, isn't considered a war. Ende reveals he sent a team to occupy the fortress and bent international law by framing it as a conditional surrender. As Visha questions the risky gambit, a soldier announces the Median army's approach. Unfazed, Ende coldly considers letting only the king of Medea inside before wiping out the rest. Shirley eagerly volunteers to calculate the cannon trajectories, begging her father for the order. Ende allows it but reminds her to call him Your Majesty, prompting a joyful dance from Shirley. Visha mutters, "This punk," as Ende reaches for her. He scoops her up as she pouts, realizing he only hears what he wants to. An enemy vehicle speeds toward them under fire, with Visha noting Shirley's perfect trajectory calculation. The armored vehicle successfully breaches the fortress gates. Soldiers immediately move in to surround the intruders. The captured king of Medea is dragged out protesting, as Ende calmly orders him to be forced to his knees. The bound king is forced to kneel before Ende. Ende informs the defeated king that they will be taking the Medean heir as a hostage. Visha internally praises the plan, realizing a hostage will secure any treaty and prevent revenge. She suddenly erupts, pointing accusingly and demanding to know who they think they're fooling. The accusation is directed at a frail, purple-haired person sitting in a wheelchair. Visha continues her angry tirade against the supposed heir. The young person in the wheelchair looks down with a pained expression. Visha yells in disbelief, calling the potential hostage a, quote, half-starved twig. The person speaks defiantly, introducing themselves as Croa Gede Medea, Prince of Medea. Prince Croa stares forward, trying to maintain his dignity despite his capture. Visha mockingly mispronounces his name as Croissant Piggy, but Ende corrects her, explaining Gede means curse. Ende remarks on Medea's bizarre customs as Visha looks on in confusion. The narration explains Medea's tradition of naming 2 heirs, one for the throne and one to inherit the cursed divine power. It's concluded that this frail Prince Croa is the one who bears the curse. Prince Croa clutches his shawl, shrinking under their scrutiny. Visha screams that the prince is worthless as a hostage, while his father insists Croa is his son. She cruelly retorts that if the king loved him, he would have dumped someone else's child on them, making Croa cry. Visha angrily tells the prince to stop crying as he apologizes through hiccups. The captive king realizes he must try to spin the situation to his advantage. Ende reframes the narrative. They aren't taking a hostage, but offering protection to an oppressed prince seeking asylum. He smirks, satisfied that this new story of saving a precious heir will look much better politically. The king protests, but Ende threatens to leave Medea to deal with the political fallout among neighboring nations. Defeated, the king accepts the terms as Ende hands him a scroll. The scroll unfurls into an impossibly long list of demands. During Christmas, Choco is the only one to receive a gift, an obsidian sword, since Visha had the king executed. While Choco celebrates, Visha notes that Ende is in a bad mood and thinks Choco should read the room. The blonde-haired girl wonders about Lord Chiron's horse-like appearance. A man introduces himself as Ram, grabbing the confused girl's hand. 3 months later, public opinion has turned in Beamgol's favor. A map illustrates how the strategic Laurelidge fortress has been a source of conflict. Beamgol's victory brings prosperity and bustling activity to the countryside. Enjoying the weather, the girl notes her medicine is working well. She smiles brightly, feeling healthy and cheerful in her strawberry dress. Deciding on a walk, she notices a remote tower is heavily guarded. She curiously asks why someone inside needs so much protection. A guard blocks her path, denying her entry into the tower. Confused, she identifies herself as the heir, but the guard cites the emperor's orders. A sign on the door confirms the rule: no children allowed without parents. Annoyed, she orders her maid Emily to get an entry pass from her father. She marvels at Emily's incredible speed as the maid dashes off. A passenger panics as his companion drives their car with reckless speed. The passenger is ejected as the driver coolly blames him for not wearing a seatbelt. The scene transitions as a lavish curtain is pulled aside. A muscular man appears, dismissed as a rich brat despite warnings of his danger. She sweetly argues that caring for the hostage is her duty as heir. She praises Beamgori's kindness while a bandaged man complains, and the muscular man smugly agrees with her praise. Someone barges into the room after a perfunctory knock. A startled girl with purple hair looks up from the floor. Alarmed, the purple-haired girl quickly crawls across the ornate rug. The man claims the princess is here to mock the girl, but the princess quickly clarifies her intentions. Seeing the girl's tearful face, someone internally scolds the man for scaring her. The princess clarifies she was just curious, prompting the purple-haired girl to question her visit. The princess shyly suggests they introduce themselves. Teased for his awkwardness, the man angrily tells the unseen speaker to shut up. The little princess looks absolutely delighted by the situation. The purple-haired girl is impressed, thinking she likes the way he looks up to her. She mentally compares him favorably to a scary Lady Achilles. The princess whispers conspiratorially from behind a curtain. He offers her a role as a punching bag playmate, which the princess angrily denies. The girl reveals a curse prevents her from walking, explaining her wheelchair. Pointing out her quick crawling, the princess wonders if she could also run. Kneeling with open arms, he offers an impossible invitation that leaves her stunned. A boy named Choco suddenly appears, encouraging her to befriend the kind princess. She tearfully reflects on her belief that she would never walk again. With renewed hope, she places a hand on a table, believing it might be possible. Trembling with effort and determination, she pushes herself to her feet. The man calmly encourages her forward, simply saying, "Come." "Hiya!" She cries out, taking her first running step. Gasping for breath, she leaps forward and is caught in his arms. Impressed by her 2 steps, he immediately plans a muscle-building regimen for her. Flustered, she finds his intense training methods unbelievable. He takes her hand in a reassuring and significant gesture. She marvels in disbelief that walking was actually possible. Wah! Her eyes fill with tears of overwhelming joy and hope. Her father reminds the smug princess that using curses in the palace is forbidden. Ende holds Visha, promising to explain the companion contract details later. With a bright smile, Visha waves and says, "Bye-bye." Gasp. The purple-haired Prince Kroa looks on in stunned silence. Overjoyed, Kroa thanks the princess is truly kind for accepting a worthless person like them. As Ende walks away with Visha, he reflects that the contract will keep her from using curses. Visha excitedly thinks that becoming friends with Kroa will be a divine-level win. Visha waves goodbye to her father emperor as he gets ready to depart. Yay! Celebrating her new friend, Visha dances and sings with joy. Suddenly, Shirley appears. startling Visha and giving her a heart attack. Visha regains her composure and formally addresses Lady Achilles. Visha nervously informs Shirley that one more friend will be joining them. Stunned into silence, Shirley glares and asks what she just said. Shirley ominously asks if another new friend is coming as Visha stammers. "How dare they?" Shirley explodes with possessive rage at the thought of someone getting between them. Vowing to tear the newcomer to shreds, Shirley unleashes a terrifying aura as Visha flees in terror. A vision shows Shirley as a vicious green cat, hissing and screeching aggressively. Time passes, showing Prince Croa diligently studying to catch up with his classes. The pink-haired tutor cheerfully announces that Prince Croa is joining the class today. In his wheelchair, Croa explains that he is no longer a prince, but is under their protection. Prince Croa looks up with a bright, hopeful smile. Shirley mockingly comments on Croa's small frame, making Visha wonder why she's acting like a villainess. Croa bashfully explains they survived on 1 potato a day, perplexing Visha with their shyness. Croa expresses their happiness at finally being able to eat well, leaving Visha speechless. Shirley slams the table, accusing Croa of pretending to be pitiful to gain Visha's favor. "Kuak?" Croa innocently asks if they aren't actually pitiful, causing Shirley to short-circuit. Tilt. Croa looks on in confusion as a comically enraged Shirley freezes behind them. Croa looks forward to working with Visha, who seems surprised to be addressed so informally. Croa immediately offers to use a formal title, but Visha tells them to go ahead. Visha explains she heard friends aren't supposed to care about status. She recalls her mother saying the same thing, which is why her mother had no friends. Croa beams with happiness, softly repeating the word friend. The narration notes that Croa easily answered even the most difficult questions in class. As Visha rests on her desk, she realizes her new friend is a genius too. Drowsily, Visha hopes Croa will have the sense to lose to her when they play games. The children's playroom is shown in a chaotic, energetic blur. Visha reflects that having 2 divine friends is great, but something feels off. Shirley and Croa energetically vie for her attention, making things twice as loud. Oho Visha is impressed that Croa is already riding a bicycle thanks to Andy's exercises. Not to be outdone, Shirley challenges everyone to a massive chess match. Overwhelmed by their constant demands, Visha clenches her eyes shut in frustration. Aish, Visha waves them off, telling her 2 friends to play by themselves for now. Phew, with a moment of quiet, she ponders the situation of gathering her own people. The scene shifts to a grand view of the palace against a purple night sky. Visha feels surrounded by nobles who see her as a child and an easy pawn. She decides she can simply ignore the minor nobles trying to win her over. As a phone rings, she realizes she can't ignore the 3 great Zephyros nobles while cycling indoors. She wonders how to shake off the nobles, annoyed that her 2 friends are constantly fighting. A brilliant idea suddenly strikes Visha. Seeing her friends bickering, Visha realizes she can use their chaos to set the stage. With a determined look, Visha prepares to announce the name of her new operation. A bright-eyed Visha points playfully. In a wheelchair, Croa looks up as a green-haired girl, Shirley, looms over them silently. Shirley laughingly attacks the purple-haired Croa, declaring it's the end for stray cat Visha, as Croa panics about being forbidden from using curses. Visha watches in horror, shouting for her 2 friends to stop. Tap, tap. Visha prepares a microphone. Visha announces she has planned for her friends to kill each other. Passing the microphone to a pink-haired man she calls Marshmallow, Visha has him explain her plan, pitting the Zephyros and Leroy families against each other for the position of her teacher. A child's drawing illustrates the conflict, as the narration explains Visha's intent to make the 2 families fight. As Emperor Ende listens, the narration details Visha's larger goal of weakening the great powers to strengthen imperial authority. The pink-haired man lays out the plan on a diagram. Step 1 of the plan is to hold a grand banquet for the princess. Step 2 involves Visha bringing up the topic of a teacher, sparking conflict between the red-haired Leroy and blue-haired Zephyros representatives. Step 3 is to let them exhaust each other in a war of attrition. Visha smugly admits she's just doing it because their constant clinging is annoying. The pink-haired man, Tarquinius Krishna, concludes the brilliant presentation. Emperor Ende beams with pride over his daughter's demonic idea, as his attendants praise her ingenuity. Visha suddenly remembers the plan requires money and worries about the cost of a banquet. Ende asks if she knows how his family, Chiron, became a great power. He reveals it's because he's ridiculously rich, causing Visha's eyes to sparkle at the thought of money. An elderly maid scolds Ende for gambling with the nation's funds, but he coolly calls it a legitimate investment. As the maid questions his sanity for funding a startup, Visha realizes his claims of wealth might be a lie. Having a tantrum, Visha pounds on her father, accusing him of being a liar determined to ruin the country. Ende calmly catches his daughter's tiny fist. Patting her head, he explains the company is secretly backed by Haviland, a major power, and is a guaranteed success. Visha stops crying, intrigued by the mention of Haviland and the guaranteed success. The narration explains Haviland is one of the Empire's 3 great powers, a remote northern territory acting more like a partner. Visha remembers from her past life that Haviland became immensely wealthy by inventing an air conditioner using ice crystals. Her eyes gleaming with sudden understanding, Visha looks up at her father. She immediately clings to him, affectionately calling him, "Daddy, Your Majesty." Ende suspiciously asks if she received a regressor buff, but Visha feigns ignorance, denying any past memories. The narration reveals Ende has the Midas touch, turning any investment he protects into a blue-chip stock. Preening, Ende declares the praise obnoxious. Taking her hand, he reassures her not to worry about money. He lifts a cheering Visha into his arms, telling her to focus on the plan. The scene shifts to a bustling, opulent ballroom filled with nobles for the banquet. 2 faceless noblewomen stroll across the gleaming marble floor. A herald announces the grand entrance of Emperor Ende Chiron and Princess Visha. Ende descends the staircase holding his daughter, both radiating an aura of power and authority. A red-haired woman in a green dress enthusiastically calls out to Visha. Ende blocks his aunt, coldly telling her to keep her distance and insulting her tacky clothes. He then muses aloud that the princess will need protection, considering a martial arts teacher, much to Visha's alarm. Panicking, Visha thinks this was just a ruse, and silently calls her father a simpleton for taking it seriously. The red-haired aunt suggests bayonet fighting, but a blue-haired woman, Duke Zephyros, interjects, offering an unarmed combat teacher instead. Duke Zephyros confidently appeals to the Emperor, arguing unarmed combat is the best starting point for the young princess. The Emperor's true desire is revealed. He wants a teacher for pankration. The 2 noblewomen are left speechless and utterly bewildered by his request. Visha is equally horrified, wondering why he'd suggest a homicidal martial art and asking if he's serious. Delighted, her aunt eagerly agrees to find a pankration teacher, believing this means Visha prefers her family. Visha plays along, happily agreeing as she inwardly urges them to just fight already. As the blue-haired Duke Zephyros remembers an expert in her own family, the red-haired aunt accuses her of lying, sparking the very conflict Visha wanted. Held in her father's arms, Visha gleefully thinks about the 2 families fighting to the death. The narrative explains that the Zephyros family diligently focused on choosing a teacher for the princess. In contrast, the Leroy family resorted to their old ways, sending assassins with the simple logic of eliminating the competition. The narration reveals the assassinated teacher was a relative of Duke Zephyros, leading to a furious, moonlit battle between the 2 noblewomen. In a much happier scene, Ende playfully tosses a delighted Visha into the air as her maid panics. Visha admires her new pink dress, thinking a certain scoundrel would never have treated her so well. Happily dancing in a field of flowers, Visha declares her daddy is the best. Peeking around a corner, Visha excitedly asks if everyone is ready. Visha compliments Shirley on her adorable detective outfit, and Shirley happily returns the praise. Visha tells Croa they look like a melancholy priest, leaving them to wonder if it's a compliment. Posing proudly in her pink dress, Visha asks how she looks now. Shirley and Croa praise Visha's beauty and schemes, but she cuts them off, saying it's time to go. The scene transitions with a flurry of pink cherry blossoms. Visha calls out to her father, who stands waiting for her under the cherry blossom trees. Ooh-ah, looking up in awe, Visha exclaims that the cherry blossoms are spectacular this year. The group enjoys a lavish picnic, and Visha graciously thanks them for their hard work. Ende leans in and warns Visha that it's about to get noisy because the pigs are coming. Confused, Visha wonders if he's talking about actual oinking pigs. Eyeing Croa, Visha muses that hungry pigs will devour anything. Croa pales in horror, asking if it's a tradition to feed prisoners to pigs. Visha and Shirley burst out laughing, with Visha calling the horrified Croa a dummy. The elderly maid asks if Visha's slyness comes from the Empress, but Ende calmly states she inherited it from him. A starstruck Shirley asks what part of her resembles the Emperor, but he coldly dismisses the idea. Fiddle? Nervously, Croa stammers, unable to speak. The maid tells Visha her tenacity is like the Emperor's, causing Croa to light up, honored by the comparison, much to Visha's confusion. A stout man with a pink mustache and hair gestures grandly, announcing the start of a meeting. Identified as the Minister of Finance, the man asks why the Emperor is here, as Visha realizes he is the pig. Ende coolly informs the minister that they are simply there for a picnic. The Minister of Finance suggests a better spot, but Ende insists the scenery is perfect here and tells him to proceed. Visha realizes this is a surprise social studies lesson and thinks her father's parenting has gone full-blown crazy. Waving to the room, the Minister of Finance officially begins the budget allocation meeting. As an official begins discussing the princess's budget, Visha suddenly shouts for him to wait a second. While the meeting drones on, Visha playfully pinches Croa's cheeks at their picnic. The official nervously notes Visha's tendency to overspend, which she immediately denies. Ende points out she was so smitten with a foreign man, she nearly gave away the palace pillars. Blushing, Visha proudly admits it, declaring the man as a hero. Ende agrees to hear her reasoning for a budget increase, but demands a letter of reflection by tomorrow. Pointing confidently, Visha vows to write something amazing. The elderly maid interrupts, reminding the Emperor about his planned trip to Astyages. Ende confirms he was going, as the maid silently fumes, convinced he would have forgotten. A confused Visha watches their exchange, unsure what's happening. Ende explains that the lunatics at Astyages are demanding he visit to pay respects to the new emperor. A golden imperial crest is shown as the narration states that while they are powerful, they are not the top dog. Compared to the vast Astyages empire, their country is small, and the emperor's absence could trigger another power struggle. A vision of the palace in flames emphasizes the danger of a new war for the throne. Visha promises to prevent such a disaster and asks to borrow someone named Choco. Ende considers sending an entire battalion instead, causing Visha to panic at the thought of starting a war. A bead of sweat drips down Visha's face as she has a sudden idea about the trip to the Empire. Whoa! Thinking of a handsome, black-haired man, Visha realizes she should prepare a gift. Visha runs toward her father, calling his name as he correctly guesses she's about to ask for money. Visha puts on a cute face, asking for money for her trip. Giggling, she insists she needs new dresses to maintain her appearance. Her father agrees, granting 100 million lakma for her dignity fund. The elderly maid scoffs in disapproval from the side. Visha throws a tantrum on her bed, refusing an escort, but her father insists it's necessary. Ende shakes his head, declaring the picnic over and telling the princess to return. As she's carried away kicking and screaming, Choco thinks that crying won't help her. Now dressed for travel, Visha walks with the elderly maid and Choco, who carry their luggage. A magnificent yellow airship waits for them in a field. On the day of departure, a worried Shirley and Croa wave goodbye as Ende sternly tells Visha not to cause trouble. Visha presses her hands and face against the airship window, looking out. The massive propeller of the airship begins to spin. Shirley and Croa wave farewell as the airship ascends into the sky. The airship flies high among the clouds. Visha trembles with relief, overjoyed to be on solid ground again. The narration explains her first airship ride was miserable, as she spent 3 days vomiting. Ugh, still queasy. Visha stumbles down a red carpet toward a silver-haired boy. The silver-haired boy clears his throat to get her attention. With a beaming smile, he formally welcomes the Princess of Kisomalos. Covering her mouth, Visha panics as another wave of nausea hits her. Just as he introduces himself as the fifth prince, Visha vomits all over him. The stunned prince looks down at his soiled clothes in utter disbelief. The scene cuts to a sparkling waterfall. Ooh-arg! A system message appears, offering to adjust the view for mental stability. The prince screams in horror, his clothes now covered in a sparkling rainbow mess. Chaco and the elderly maid rush in, shouting for Lady Visha and the prince. Visha decides her best course of action is to pretend she fainted. Floating above the airship, Visha confidently thinks her attendants can handle the mess as they yell for her. At the guest palace, Visha laughs hysterically, while an unseen person demands to know if she's in her right mind. The elderly maid panics over the diplomatic incident, Visha laughs uncontrollably, and Chaco is scolded for also finding it hilarious. Stopping the chaos, the maid announces their audience with the emperor and says Visha is already prepared. Visha explains her genius plan. Causing a scene will get them sent off to recover quickly. The maid's disembodied voice agrees it's a good idea as Visha nearly trips. Visha happily skips through the grand halls of the palace. She runs far ahead of her two attendants, filled with excitement. The maid sternly reminds Visha of the proper code of conduct before the emperor. Visha impatiently brushes off the warning, but the maid thinks she's completely untrustworthy. Chaco agrees she's untrustworthy but cute, prompting an annoyed Visha to deny being an idiot. Visha strikes a determined pose, ready to face the emperor. The huge, ornate doors to the audience chamber swing open, impressing Visha with their intimidating scale. She walks confidently down the long hall toward the throne. With a perfect curtsy, Visha formally introduces herself. The silver-haired emperor on the throne smirks, bestowing a blessing of the golden ram. Visha graciously returns the blessing with a bow. The emperor acknowledges her long and arduous journey. He then asks her a pointed question, catching her attention. The emperor wonders if their next meeting will still be the golden ram, making Visha realize he's testing her. Visha boldly claims she placed him on the throne and asks if he can take it back himself. Staring back defiantly, Visha challenges him, asking why she couldn't. The emperor smiles, gesturing for her to prove her words. Visha stands between the elderly maid and Choco after her audience. The maid congratulates Visha on her magnificent performance, and Visha happily agrees. With a thumbs up, the maid adds that Visha masterfully hid her ignorance by not talking. Visha silently fumes that the old hag's compliments are always twisted, as the maid thinks she's just being accurate. Now in a green dress, Visha beams, excited for her day off before the banquet. Having met all the royals, Visha realizes Lord Hesperon is missing, guessing he was excluded for being illegitimate. Her shoulders slump as she worries she won't be able to meet Lord Hesperon after all. Visha looks up in surprise at someone off-screen. Lord Hesperon stands alone by a sunlit window. Visha runs toward a startled Lord Hesperon, excitedly asking if he remembers her. Shh! He asks her to stop calling him young hero, leaving Visha confused. Her attendants panic in the distance, chasing after her as Lord Hesperon sighs. Hesperon suggests they leave the banquet hall, and Visha readily agrees. He repeats his plea for her not to call him the young hero. Kneeling down, he tells her to call him whatever she wants, but she protests. He explains with a pained look that they are being watched, and Visha understands. Visha brightly announces she has a gift for the young hero, surprising him. He insists he's not a great person, and her previous gift was too much. She excitedly thrusts a small blue gift box toward him. His eyes widen in surprise as he looks at the box. The gift is revealed to be a sword ornament with a spirit stone for good luck. Opening it, he finds an ornate key-shaped charm, which Visha explains she bought with her own allowance. She proudly says the gift is filled with her wish that he won't get hurt. Clutching the gift, Lord Hesperon gives a genuine warm smile. He suggests she return to the party, worrying his lowly status will harm her reputation, which annoys Visha. Realizing arguing will only make things difficult for him, she relents. He gratefully thanks her for her constant concern and attention. Visha beams with pure, unadulterated joy. She watches him walk back toward the grand palace. Blushing, Visha thinks her mission is complete. She greeted the emperor and saw the hero. The elderly maid scolds Visha for giving a peasant an expensive gift, but Visha shouts that he is not a peasant. The maid tells her to stop and return to the banquet, leaving Visha pouting. As the maid tells Choco to stop laughing, he thinks about how adorable the princess is. Visha suddenly stops, hearing a strange sound nearby. Her eyes go wide with shock as she looks up at something. The scene turns gray and hazy as the maid looks around, calling for Her Highness. In a now empty garden, the maid's voice calls out in panic. The scene transitions to a caravan traveling through a forest at dusk. Inside a carriage, Visha thinks how surreal it is that she was just at a banquet. She realizes she's now with an unconscious boy being taken away by thieves. A flashback begins, showing Visha near the maze garden entrance. Meow, she recalls seeing a uniquely fluffy white cat. White cat. She was captivated by its adorableness, but lost sight of it when it ran off. As she was about to return to the party, she paused. The fifth prince suddenly ran towards her, shouting a warning about a gravity field barrier. What? He was sucked into a black void, and Visha was pulled in too when she tried to help, landing hard on a mountain path. They find themselves in the middle of a caravan robbery, facing a burly thief. Visha desperately declares that they are nobles and promises a handsome reward for their lives. She offers a valuable ornate jewel from her dress as proof. Back in the carriage, sitting beside the unconscious prince, she wonders what to do next. The groggy prince mutters in annoyance as he wakes up. Slap! Slap! Visha energetically tries to rouse him. Startled awake, he listens to Visha's urgent instructions. Visha explains they've fallen into a bandit trap. She details their cover story: runaway nobles seeking an arranged marriage. Shocked by the marriage fabrication, their arrival is abruptly announced. A thief roughly orders them out of the carriage. Visha surveys the vast, inescapable bandit camp before them. They are directed to the leader's tent as honored guests. Pat? Visha tries to steady a very hesitant prince. The prince looks on, completely overwhelmed by the situation. Sighing at his reluctance, she firmly grabs his hand. Visha encourages him to act confident as they proceed together. She enters the tent with a bold, cheerful greeting. The bandit leader welcomes them to a rather unexpected feast. Tada Visha eagerly eyes the offered organ stew. Gak! The prince recoils in disgust at the barbaric food. Visha cleverly has the protesting prince locked away while she enjoys an apple. The scene shifts abruptly back to the Grand Kisamalos palace. The black-haired emperor stands before a chalkboard in his study. A sleepy Shirley and Croa struggle to stay awake late at night. The emperor scoffs at their youth, earning a silent boomer retort. A guard bursts into the room with urgent news. He is informed that Princess Visha has gone missing. The news reveals she disappeared with Prince Nanak, shocking the girls. Enraged by the report, the emperor shatters a piece of chalk. He impulsively orders an invasion, but the two girls object. Shirley rationally warns him against leaving the empire vulnerable to treason. The two young advisors stand firm in their counsel. The emperor pauses, silently considering their logical argument. They await his final decision with nervous anticipation. He smirks, privately amused by the ridiculous kids. He declares a 1-week ultimatum before marching to war. Dismissing them for bed, he denies their request to scheme further. He carries Shirley away as she quietly ponders his strategy. A diagram explains that Medea blocks their country's path to Astyages. Dropped off for the night, Shirley wonders how she can possibly help. Croa quietly requests a private moment with the emperor. Whisper, whisper, she reveals a secret passage and offers a map. The emperor smiles, intrigued by this valuable piece of information. He gently pats her head, reassuring her before she sleeps. She watches him depart, confident that Visha will be rescued. Alone in her room, Kroa prays for Visha's swift and safe return. The scene transitions to a fur-lined boot stepping onto grassy ground. Visha cheers excitedly, now dressed in simple, rustic clothing. Carrying heavy milk pails, she resolves not to be an idle captive. She skillfully milks a goat, a new trick learned from the bandits. Visha celebrates the announcement of milk porridge for breakfast. Visha scoffs at the foolish prince, who is locked away eating potatoes. Her collection of valuable jewels and accessories awaits sale in a distant city. The bandit leader looks nervously flustered. Visha thinks the count is generous, while Choco worries he's gotten involved with a troublemaker. Dismissed to play outside, Visha feels relieved her identity is safe and plans her escape. Walking through the camp, she anxiously hopes her rescuers will arrive soon. Whoa! The bandits stare in awe as a massive airship appears overhead, dropping a figure from the sky. Crash, Choco lands dramatically, shouting Lady Visha's name. He fiercely vows to eliminate the people who took her. Visha frantically stops him, insisting they didn't mean to capture them. Gritting his teeth, Choco considers his next move. He chooses a different path, declaring he will subdue them instead. After knocking out a bandit, Choco tells Visha he will handle the situation and call the troops. Visha directs him to rescue the fifth prince from a warehouse, leaving a confused Choco to wonder why he's there. The elderly maid lands nearby, desperately calling for her highness. She sweeps Visha into a tight, relieved hug. The maid worriedly asks if Visha is hurt. Overwhelmed with relief, Visha finally bursts into tears. The beaten bandit leader regrets their actions as Visha sheepishly apologizes for deceiving him. Visha cheerfully waves goodbye, allowing them to keep her gifts as Choco watches happily. The rescued prince furiously demands the bandits be beheaded, while Visha blames him for the whole mess. She turns to confront the angry prince. Visha blackmails him with an embarrassing photo, shocking him into silence. Defeated, the prince agrees to leave as Visha gives him a sassy farewell. She gives a final wave as the bandits bid farewell to the Princess of Calamity. The scene transitions to a magnificent white and blue palace. The silver-haired ruler of Astyages sighs, annoyed by the absurd demands for damages from Kisamalkos. Visha, now back in a fine dress, waves happily, thinking the demands are a bargain for their poor security. Ugh. The prince grumbles that she'll be kicked out, leaving Visha confused. As a parting gift, she gives him the embarrassing photo, much to his flustered dismay. He surprises her by offering himself as a partner for a future political marriage. The prince stands proudly, awaiting her answer. She dismisses him for being too far down the line of succession, enraging him. Visha smirks, smugly agreeing to consider his proposal. She shoos him away, telling him to send a letter, and he dismisses her in turn. Her mission accomplished, Visha skips away with glee. The golden airship sits ready in a field, prepared for their departure. Visha strikes a cool pose in a new pink dress and sunglasses. She sleeps soundly in her maid's lap, having taken motion sickness medicine for the ride home. Now rested and refreshed, a sunglasses-clad Visha looks ahead. The Emperor of Kisamalkos stands waiting for her, looking dapper. He pulls his daughter into a warm, protective embrace. Visha cries on his shoulder, complaining about the prince and the bandits. He comforts his crying daughter, reassuring her after her ordeal. She explains through sobs how Choco rescued her with an airship, piquing the Emperor's interest. Her thought continues, proposing that airships could transport troops and supplies faster than tanks. Visha looks up at him with teary, hopeful eyes. A green-haired Shirley is amazed by Visha's idea of an aerial supply corps. The Emperor joyfully lifts Visha, praising his daughter for proposing an air force and offering a kiss. Visha recoils, protesting that his spit is gross. He calmly retorts that her tears are, objectively, grosser. He gives his protesting daughter a kiss on the cheek anyway. A photo shows the memorable moment Nanak cried while eating potatoes. Her thoughts ring with joy. I'm finally back at the Imperial Palace. The majestic imperial palace stands brilliantly under the sun. Visha recalls that upon her return, her father Chiron immediately held her, as she cried and wailed. Now she must give her report as an imperial princess, returning from a diplomatic mission. Standing on a stool, Visha formally addresses her father and her attendants. She begins her report, explaining how she fell into a strange wormhole right after arriving at the empire. Visha places a small hand on her father's chest, continuing her story. She concludes her tale with a bright, cheerful smile and a wave. Shirley and Croa praise Lady Visha's quick-wittedness and genius idea for an air force. The Emperor confirms her story matches the telegram and concludes her report. The elderly maid excuses herself to rest, and the Emperor grants his permission. The Emperor summons Shirley and Croa to follow him. Confused, Visha asks her papa why she can't return to her own palace. He instructs her to watch something before she leaves. Whoa! A surprised Shirley points outside, telling Visha to look. Dangling from a high tower, a bound Chaco screams for Lady Visha to save him. Visha questions his dramatics, but the Emperor explains that the fool has a fear of heights. He declares that Choco failed as her escort, so the punishment is deserved as Choco screams in protest. As the girls watch, they resolve to protect Visha while the Emperor observes the scene. Visha realizes Choco is afraid of heights, yet he jumped to save her and climbed a tower for Croa. Recalling he climbed down like a cockroach, she wonders if she misremembered. She's moved that he faced his fear for her, while the Emperor seems to question his subordinate's sanity. Visha excitedly recounts how Chaco jumped from the airship without a parachute to rescue her. Holding a megaphone, the Emperor acknowledges that Choco did make an effort. He announces Choco's punishment is reduced to 1 hour. Choco begs to be let down. The Emperor tells the princess to rest as she pats his arm, agreeing while Choco's cries echo. Walking through the garden, Croa reminds Visha how worried everyone was. Shirley reveals the Emperor was so furious upon hearing Visha disappeared that he was about to lead an army to find her. She shivers, recalling the Emperor's terrifying rage. Croa explains she revealed Medea's secret passages to the Emperor to prevent a direct march. This would have allowed him to conquer Medea and reach Visha faster, a plan that shocks the princess. Visha nervously asks if it's okay for Croa to reveal her own country's royal secrets. Croa declares her duty is to Visha, though Visha notes she's also the Prince of Medea. Changing the subject, Visha offers a reward, and Croa shyly makes a request. Croa gives Shirley a sly, knowing glance. Eek! Shirley immediately gets angry, sensing she's being targeted. Shirley accuses Croa of insulting her, but Croa plays innocent. Accused of making a smug face, Croa laughs it off, saying Shirley must be mistaken. Visha sighs, wishing her friends would just play nice together. As Croa professes her loyalty, Shirley complains his personality is getting weirder. The two bicker as Visha despairs, wondering if they will ever get along. The scene shifts, showing the Grand Palace 1 week later. While her hair is being braided, Visha wonders about a noisy sound. Thump, thump! The pounding on the doors sounds just like Emily. The doors burst open, revealing a fluffy golden sheep striking a pose. A close-up shows the adorable, red-eyed sheep winking charmingly. Visha and her maid stare in complete shock at the bizarre visitor. The maids scream as the sheep talks. Visha frantically orders them out, forbidding them from mentioning the old sheep. A terrified maid flees the room, screaming that she understands. Kwang! The grand doors burst open with a flash of light. A startled Visha peeks out, nervously questioning the identity of Lord Kisamalos. Visha asks if he's really Lord Kisamalos, and the golden sheep proudly confirms it. He grandly introduces himself as the great ruler Kisamalos, currently descended as a spirit. Visha furiously tackles the sheep for his lack of decorum, while he protests that he forgot his new form. He urgently explains that his ability to speak might be temporary. Visha gets off the exhausted, winded sheep. The sheep reveals he can speak because Tanya Listo gave him her heart, a gift from her family of orators. A shocked Visha realizes the implication of his words. She thinks in disbelief, wondering if the old hag Listo likes her. Still processing, she wonders again if head-maid Listo truly likes her. Completely baffled, Visha questions why the head maid would like her. The sheep suggests they bonded during their trip, but Visha retorts they only hugged and cried. Oh, the sheep has a moment of realization. Understanding the hug was the key. A memory surfaces of Visha crying deeply while being held by the head maid. Visha wonders why she's suddenly precious, recalling the maid never even looked at her in her past life. The sheep prepares to reveal his true purpose for coming. Visha's eyes sparkle with excitement, asking if he has a secret weapon for her. Wah! The sheep angrily complains his wool is matted and demands to be sheared immediately. Visha is thoroughly unimpressed, asking if all this fuss was just for a haircut. She tackles him again, furious that he's tarnishing his divine status and being too loud. Amidst the struggle, the sheep suddenly remembers the real reason he came. Visha shakes him, demanding he say it quickly, and he prepares to deliver his important message. Too late, he can only let out a pathetic bah, enraging Visha, who calls him a useless god. As maids carry the bleeding sheep away, a disgusted Visha demands water to clean her ears and mouth. Her mood ruined, Visha decides to just laze around for the rest of the day. A voice calls for Princess Vishnuhel, making her wonder if it's her unlucky day. Her father, the emperor, stands before her with a cool and imposing presence. He states a father can visit his daughter anytime, and Visha cheekily suggests he play with her too. The emperor easily lifts his daughter into his arms. Holding her close, he informs her that she and her friends have a task to complete. A sharp whistle cuts through the air. He holds the whistle, looking expectantly at the door. Visha strikes a pose, cheerfully announcing herself as Visha. A green-haired Rasuli follows suit with a cool pose, declaring Rasuli too. A flustered Kroa reluctantly poses, mumbling, Kroa 3, while questioning the necessity of it all. Visha playfully teases Kroa about Medea's traditions, and he decides to just take her word for it. The emperor smirks, about to explain why he's gathered them. He calls them trouble-making young animals, prompting Visha to think he's chosen the wrong topic. Visha nervously asks if her auntie and Zephyros have already had their falling out. He confirms they'll be fighting for years, but shows a letter delegating a certain task to him. He proudly introduces Baroness Lai, a certified first-class pankration instructor. The energetic, orange-haired Baroness Lai strikes a dynamic pose. She asks if they remember her from prison, shocking Visha, who realizes the trainer is her prison buddy. The Baroness explains she was jailed for folding a man from House Zephyros in half, which Visha silently approves of. Kroa smiles sweetly, assuming she's exempt from training since she can't walk. Visha and Rasuli grab him, declaring they're all in this together since pankration includes ground techniques. The emperor smirks, revealing he already prepared for Kroa's disability. He holds up a pair of shiny white roller skates. As the emperor fits a skate onto Kroa's cast, the boy wonders how to use it, while Visha watches with glee. Thump! Kroa wobbles on his new roller skate. Visha holds Kroa's hands, telling him it will take time to get used to the skates. Rasuli thoughtfully comments that he'll look cool once he masters them. Visha and Rasuli excitedly ask their father for roller skates of their own. After falling, Kroa listens as the emperor tells the girls he'll have a shoemaker find them sturdy skates, and they cheer. The emperor announces he is taking his leave. Visha pats her father's back, encouraging him to do well as Rasuli says to take care. Baroness Li cheerfully addresses the imperial princess and her friends. The three friends look up nervously as their instructor asks if they should begin today's lesson. Huh? The Baroness presents a toothbrush and dentures, declaring their first lesson is proper brushing. Rasuli raises his hand, asking what brushing has to do with martial arts. The Baroness explains that jaw strength is crucial in pankration, where even biting is allowed. Kroa despairs at the culture of Kisamalos, while Rasuli defensively retorts that Medea also practices pankration. The Baroness asks Visha if she also brushes her gums, and the princess admits she isn't sure. Their instructor brightly encourages them, demonstrating the proper technique on herself. A montage begins, showing that days have passed one by one. The montage shows happy moments, like a picnic with her father and friends. Visha excitedly celebrates with a huge, multi-tiered pink cake. She trains diligently, striking a confident martial arts pose. She happily drinks a glass of milk after her training. Visha looks out the window, reflecting on her new life. She recalls attending classes every day, often falling asleep between her studious friends. She remembers being nagged by Granny Risto, only to be whisked away by her father. Visha even took part in planning the new Air Force. Finally, after a year, she celebrates the complete recovery of her paralyzed tongue. A new challenge arises, centered around a confident-looking Rasuli, who, the golden sheep, Lord Kisamalos, awakens to warn her that Rasuli's territory is in danger. Visha learns the Achilles territory is being swindled by Count Achilles and his son, who are passing off cheap stones as precious gems. The matter involves a formal letter and scroll bearing Rasuli's name. A long, green-haired spirit with a kind smile appears before her. Grabbing the startled Visha, the spirit explains he can't get through to Rasuli himself. He demands that she marry Rasuli to save the Achilles bloodline from ending. Visha thinks she'd ignore him if he weren't such a high-level spirit. She reflects on how she's lived diligently for the past 2 years. Visha suddenly throws a tantrum, leaving Rasuli confused about her mood swing. Kroa confidently steps forward with her roller skates, declaring she will calm the princess. Kroa offers chocolate, but Visha angrily refuses while Rasuli observes skeptically. Rasuli smirks, thinking his own choice was right and referring to someone as a thieving little cat. With the crisis averted, the 3 friends stand together, Visha looking resolute. Kroa and Rasuli wave with bright, happy smiles. Visha waves back, her mission a success. Back at the palace, the emperor praises Visha for resolving the Achilles territory matter. He offers to reduce her palace's debt, which she cheers for, but she politely declines his offer of a statue. He entrusts her with choosing the symbol for the new Air Force from a board of options. With sparkling eyes, Visha enthusiastically chooses the Hercules beetle. When asked why, she explains that the name sounds super strong. Her father thoughtfully considers her choice, agreeing that Hercules sounds powerful. At a council meeting, the emperor's decision is announced, but in official objects, citing the beetle's lack of connection to the empire. Visha cleverly suggests the golden Hercules beetle, which everyone agrees evokes the empire's symbolic golden ram. The meeting is interrupted as a man rushes in with an urgent report for His Majesty. Visha begs her father to take her with her, not wanting to be left with old men. The scene transitions to a set of ornate, closed doors. An official announces the arrival of Euphrina Roroi, Visha's maternal grandmother, leaving her stunned. The emperor hears that her grandmother wants to host a banquet, but he thinks it's a bad idea for him to attend. He counters by inviting the former marchioness to a banquet at the imperial palace instead. As the official leaves, Visha looks up at her thoughtful father, hesitating to speak. Her father asks if she dislikes her grandmother, and Visha admits she has no feelings either way. She explains it would be odd to meet her since they never met, even in her past life. With a serious expression, the emperor reveals that he has met her before. A curious Visha asks what kind of person her grandmother is. The emperor holds his daughter tightly, bluntly calling her grandmother a complete lunatic. He recalls a fearsome, red-haired woman, stating he wouldn't even call her decent as an empty compliment. He reassures Visha, promising to find an excuse for her to leave, and telling her to hide behind him. Visha asks if her grandma is worse than the head chamberlain, or weirder than Rasuli. Recalling the stern head chamberlain and a cheerful Rasuli, the emperor confirms her grandmother is far worse. He describes her as an unkind woman who treats emperors like filth, making Visha hope she can skip the banquet. The emperor warns that if she misses the banquet, her grandmother will just demand a private audience, causing Visha to despair. He reveals the true reason for her return. She wants to be involved with the new Air Force. When he mentioned Visha proposed the idea, her grandmother insisted on a meeting, much to Visha's horror. Visha throws a tantrum, asking why he told her, but her father calmly replies he couldn't lie. He smiles, again telling his daughter not to worry and that she can hide behind him. Visha looks up at her father, clasping her hands anxiously but slightly reassured. The scene shifts to a beautifully decorated hall, signaling the start of the banquet. The arrival of the former Marchioness Roroi is announced, shocking the gathered nobles. Visha, Rasuli, and Kroa nervously peek out from behind a large pillar. The emperor, dressed in formal attire, grimly observes the scene, calling it a shocking sight. He notes that despite her daughter's passing, it's considered normal to wear mourning clothes to public events. The Marchioness appears, an imposing red-haired woman dressed entirely in black mourning clothes and a veil. Visha stares in disbelief, wondering if this severe woman is truly her maternal grandmother. The emperor confronts the Marchioness, reminding her it's a celebration, but she retorts that her daughter's mourning isn't over. He scoffs at her solemn act, reminding her she had no problem running around the battlefield. Hiding, Visha worries that her powerful grandmother might get angry enough to destroy the entire hall. The Marchioness ignores the emperor, her attention fixed on Visha's hiding spot, as she asks about the Air Corps. She expresses disbelief that a child could conceive of such a plan, glaring at the emperor. Betraying his promise, the emperor points Visha out, telling his mother-in-law to ask her directly. Wah! The Marchioness instantly closes the distance, grabbing a terrified Visha's face. Visha is shocked by the chilling cold of her grandmother's hand on her cheek. The Marchioness glares menacingly, accusing the emperor of killing her daughter while he lives comfortably. Visha retorts that her mother died of her own will, but her grandmother blames Visha for the illness that followed her birth. Visha defiantly argues that the doctor and her own father were at fault, questioning why she's being blamed. The Marchioness simply responds with a dismissive HMPH. She looks down at the defiant Visha, surprised she isn't crying, and says she looks just like Helbart. The emperor remarks that he would have cried, prompting a tiny Visha to ask what they're whispering about. Visha stomps her foot in frustration, fuming that her grandmother insulted her upon their very first meeting. Headmaid Listo steps forward, admonishing the Marchioness for being disrespectful to the princess. Holding Visha, the headmaid adds that she's disrespecting the late empress, but the Marchioness claims it's her right as a mother. Visha glares, thinking her grandmother doesn't even seem sad and is just trying to pick a fight. Her grandmother challenges her, asking if she truly believes a parent who lost a child feels no sadness. Visha thoughtfully replies that if their roles were reversed, her mother likely wouldn't have cried over her grandmother's death. When asked why, Visha simply says that's the kind of person her mother was. Visha reflects on her mother, a woman who married a boneheaded dad and tried to die with him. Observing from afar, Rasuli and Kroa note that Visha's mother wouldn't care about being blamed for her own death. The red-haired Marchioness lifts her veil with a smirk, calling the children interesting. The emperor steps in possessively, warning her not to think about them as he claimed them first. She glares at him, asking why he must always get in her way. He retorts coldly, asking if she ever considers that she's the one in his way. The Marchioness notes the emperor now resembles her daughter Lurutia, enraging the emperor, who calls her a crazy woman. She announces her intent to take Visha to the Leroy estate, daring the emperor to write a contract if he mistrusts her. Enraged, the emperor demands 3,000 contracts, challenging her to grant permission. The Marchioness correctly accuses him of reaching for his gun to shoot her. She remarks that his defiant attitude and readiness to draw his gun are just like her daughter, Lurutia. The emperor is stunned by the comparison, while the Marchioness smirks, thinking he finally got mad. He turns the decision over to a surprised Visha, stating her own will matters most. Peeved Visha bluntly refuses, declaring she won't go because her grandma's bathroom probably smells. Utterly shocked, the Marchioness insists she doesn't need a bidet and can use her hands. Visha recoils in horror, shouting that her grandmother is as gross as her Aunt Kazelnu for saying the same thing. The Marchioness freezes, stunned to be compared to someone named Kazelnu. Visha insists they're both gross for offering to help her personally, leaving the Marchioness speechless. Defeated, The Marchioness decides to leave, while Visha cheerfully shoos her away. The headmaid is impressed that the old hag left so quickly, prompting Visha to question her rude language. The maid dismisses it as a private setting, leaving Visha to wonder if a palace banquet hall counts as private. Resolved, the emperor decides to strengthen security around the princess's palace, knowing Marchioness Ruroy won't give up. An ominous castle appears as narration warns that the Ruroy family would even kidnap a princess. Visha sighs, realizing she'll have to lay low for a while to stay safe. With the tension broken, an excited Croa grabs Visha's hands, insisting they dance now that her grandmother is gone. Visha then turns to a blushing Rasuli, taking her hands as well. The emperor smoothly cuts in, declaring that as her father, he gets the first dance. A young noble objects loudly, calling the emperor a coward, who coolly suggests he become emperor if he dislikes it. Visha happily cuts through the bickering, deciding they can all just dance together. Dancing with her father, Visha admits her grandma was scary, but the banquet is still fun. The scene shifts to the grand palace, illuminated by the full moon. Alone in the night, the Marchioness stands in somber thought. A new character appears, a handsome, blonde-haired prince in a formal uniform. He confidently introduces himself as the sole legitimate heir and only prince of Kisamalos. He continues his profile, revealing he's single and has no lover, only a war buddy. The prince is then shown sitting beside an elegant woman with dark hair in a lavish red dress.